stretched wide open.
I am now fully recovered, and I did it all by myself.
And then avowed that everything would have turned out for the best if the schoolmate had not snitched on her, if her mother had never learned the truth, and especially if she had never received psychiatric counselling. I wanted to remind her that she was contradicting what she had been articulating throughout the evening, but I apprehended that she was already exhausted from reflecting upon her past, and therefore I didn't point out the inconsistency. Then, on still another night in April, Inga and I were telling each other about the sort of day we had. Very casually, Inga, she began giggling and smiled and said,
"Oh, Sayo came around me."
My relaxed posture instantly gave way to alarm. My slouch disappeared as my back straightened, and I was tensing everywhere.
"What happened?"
I pressed. She chuckled and answered that she was in the school library studying for Professor Rothbard's upcoming exam, and Sayo strolled by. She got into conversation with him, she recalled, and she smiled to me and remarked that Sayo was such a nice, fun, friendly flirt. She seemingly held no memory of her prior accusation about him. Finally, Inga stared into space, giggled, and said,
"I like Sayo."
My jaw dropped open and hung ajar. I stared at her in that fashion for what must have been at least a minute, but it felt like eternity. Inga elicited no comment on the sudden silence. She simply began talking about a different subject. The next day, I marched into Professor Rothbard's office and said,
"Do you remember when Inga told us about Sayo threatening her?" "Oh, yes," Professor Rothbard replied. "How could I forget?"
I recounted to him Inga going over the conspicuously carefree conversation with Sayo. As I spoke, Professor Rothbard elected to look at some papers related to his Scythe chapter. When I finished, he disinterestedly rasped,
"Oh, yeah, that's weird."
As he said that, he didn't even look at me. His eyes were on the Scythe sheets.
Hey, Professor!"
I raised my voice.
"It's not weird. It's disturbing."
Professor Rothbard shrugged it off. This greatly harmed my trust in him. Almost every day in the first 2 weeks of May, Inga changed what she said about Sayo, back and forth. First, she went back to saying that Sayo did threaten her. A day later, she talked about Sayo being such a good friend. 2 days after that, she went back to talking about him being a would-be rapist. Every time Inga switched what she said about Sayo, she sounded as if she bore no recollection of what she expounded concerning Sayo the previous time, even if it was just the day before. In late May, over the weekend, near the semester's end, Inga simply broke out sobbing to me.
I don't want to exist anymore."
Upon some quick introspection, she ascertained that it was not in response to any immediate happening. That was just her default mood. It epitomized her childhood and middle school and high school in Tromsø, and the sensation had been periodically returning, haunting her throughout the semester. She also mentioned how all men, especially American men, are lascivious and secretly yearn to rape her. She put her hands in mine and tearfully she said,
"Trevor, promise me, you'll always protect me."
I did as she asked, but as was becoming increasingly evident, the greatest danger to Inga was not anything external to her. She also reflected on her father, Matt Pennington, in a manner similar to how she spoke of Sayo, as if he were two completely different, opposite people. One being entirely benign and nurturing, the other wholly cruel and predatory. And in every instance wherein she reflected on this one single dimension personality of a man, be it Sayo or her father, her mind seemed unable to access her interpretation of that man's other personality. It wasn't just that Inga acted like Jekyll and Hyde. She reacted to every man as if he, too, were Jekyll and Hyde. Fortunately, though, she promised me that once she flew to Tromsø for the summer, she would pursue regular mental health treatment. I didn't have a webcam, and I couldn't video chat back then, but when Inga returned to Tromsø in June, we were on Google Chat very often. As gently as I could, I queried as to whether she had yet made a renewed visit to a mental health professional. She brushed this off and sounded as if nothing of the sort had ever been deposited in her memory bank. When I reminded her of what she had promised me, she typed back that there was no need for fulfilling it, because everything was fantastic, and she was as happy as could be. I had to fess up.
When you told me you would go back to periodic mental health treatment, I was greatly relieved.
She then typed back, ouch. Once Inga landed in Honolulu for the autumn of 2010 semester, her symptoms, they intensified. Back in May, she had taken me to her apartment and showed me all the clothes in her closet and drawers. She had many tops of different colours, except for 2 black garments, one of them backless. Every garment was obviously distinct from the others, but in autumn, she put on the exact same backless black top to class every day for over a month. Then, on her LinkedIn page, she uploaded photos where she was realistically photoshopped to look like a fresh corpse, ready for burial. One experiencing pallor mortis. Her face was rendered chalky white, and this was not for Halloween. It was up year-round. On her LinkedIn page, she has up her resume and describes herself as a stable, responsible, ever-professional businesswoman. And next to that description is a photo of her photoshopped to resemble a corpse. I think some people assumed Inga was, quote-unquote, just being a goth or a fan of black metal music. But I've known goths. In fact, in high school, I studied under an eccentric public speaking teacher who was one. She was in her 30s at the time. Of course, there are always variations within individuals, but none of the goths that I have known have given me the impression that they genuinely wish to end their lives. By contrast, for more than a decade, Inga has literally wanted to be dead. I therefore had to treat the corpse pictures seriously. By October, Inga had someone back in Norway upload onto YouTube a video where Inga delivers a monologue in English about being a fascist, quote, of the Fourth Reich, unquote, alluding to Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Privately, Inga said that this was a joke, but that it was supposed to be humorous was not obvious from the video itself. The description says, news and politics. An English speaker who saw the video would be reasonable if he or she deciphered it as some indication that Inga admired something about neo-Nazis. Again, it didn't behoove me to dismiss this as some sort of shitposting one might find on 4chan or 8chan, because Inga really has wished for death. I couldn't write this off as merely perverted satire. I noticed that around 2014, this bewildering video was finally privated. But the website known as Radaris still has a record of this video having existed, and Inga's real full birth name is still visible on the Radaris record. And it got worse. Inga showed me the publicly viewable live journal she wrote, mostly in English, from 2003 to 2007. A lot of it is about the self-cutting and about how she wants to cut her face up so severely that no one would even recognize her anymore. I'm thankful that she didn't slash her face, but with the corpse pictures, she nevertheless accomplished this part about becoming unrecognizable. There is also an entry from 2003 admitting that she is disturbed that people act as if they don't notice the self-cutting, but that she also thinks that this is good because it conveniences her ability to cut herself. And then there's an entry from 2004 where she elucidates on her fantasy of killing her mother. Inga does not say that this is some long-term plan, conscious plan. No. She imagines one evening she'll finally become so aggravated by her mother's nagging that she'll grab a knife on impulse and plunge it into her mother. This was not the sort of dumb, terse, empty threat that regularly appears on Twitter or on Facebook. Those along the lines of, "How dare you disagree with me? Go somewhere and die." No, the description of how Inga expects the stabbing to commence is long, graphic, and very dire. Below that murder threat entry is a follow-up from 4 months later, where it says, quote, "It stings like a bitch," unquote, to read this pathological reverie because now, apparently, she's all better. But she wasn't. She told me how she often contemplates using her knife to extract violent retribution from parties in Tromsø who had wronged her. She was not specific about the identities of these parties. I have that murder threat open in a web browser at the very moment as I write this. Because the blog entry is from over a decade ago, yet in the ensuing years, the gestures indicated an enduring fascination with violence and death, and child molesters surged on, unabated. Fretful of the direction Inga had taken, I rushed to the local library and devoured its book on abnormal psychology. As these events transpired, Professor Rothbard put Inga into higher and higher positions of authority and responsibility. She became the president of his SIFE club. She made an official website for Private Hawaiian College's SIFE chapter and prominently exhibited one of her corpse pictures on it. I asked our mutual friends, most of them from Private Hawaiian College, including members of its SIFE team under Inga's leadership, if they thought that there was anything suspicious with respect to Inga's public behaviour. They admitted that they could not miss the morbid gestures and were disturbed by them, but then they added quickly that they would never, ever, ever confront Inga about any of it. They were just too intimidated by her. Inga was thin, but she also towered over them, and they did not dare to incur the wrath of someone who uploaded photoshops as ghoulish as Inga's. Besides, she occupied a supervisory role over some of them. These schoolmates maintained it would be rude and bossy to tell Inga not to perform these morbid gestures. I replied,
"It doesn't have to be. When Inga kept making the self-administered wrist wounds more obvious years ago, she was playing a game of chicken. The idea was that if no one called her out on it, she could tell herself that what she was doing was perfectly normal and therefore safe and acceptable. It's important not to play along. That only reinforces these tendencies. I think we should tell her something like this. It's cool knowing you, and you bring value into my life. When I see the dark imagery, when I see the Fourth Reich video, I can't help but think you may have a lot going on in your life. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. But I want you to know that if you ever do want to talk about it, I'm here for you." If we speak to her something like this, it's not being bossy or demanding that she change, it's being caring. At the same time, it lets her know, of course, you notice the morbid gestures and that it's concerning. You're letting her know that she isn't fooling anyone, and you aren't rejecting her as a whole or as a person or anything.
The so-called friends scoffed at my recommendation, proclaiming it would be too much trouble and that I'm just a self-righteous jerk. I decided to make one more appeal to Professor Rothbard on the matter. Bringing up her shouting elicited a disappointing response from him months prior, but Professor Rothbard seemed too distracted that afternoon. Perhaps if I won his undivided attention, he would realize the gravity of the situation. Upon having gone over these developments, Professor Rothbard sighed and lectured to me in a resigned and paternal tone.
"Trevor, any girl her age would do that. All women are prone to scream false accusations of rape."
Then he started telling me horror stories about his ex-wives. The extent of his misogyny stunned me. Something in the man's psychology draws him to damaged women, and he assumes all females are like that. I thought to myself,
is he including his own daughter, his real daughter, that is, the first daughter, in that category?
I tried to talk to him about a compassionate intervention, and I also told him why playing along, or acting as if the morbid gestures are safe, reinforces the pathology. He got defensive and said that by always acting as if everything Inga did was safe, he was the one who was being supportive. I had known that professor since 1997. My opinion of him has never recovered after this conversation. I resolved that there might be another route though. On Twitter, I noticed Matt Pennington following a rather strange woman in Minnesota, Judy, who was apparently in her 50s. When I got a gander at this Judy woman's Angelfire website, it said that she ran a non-for-profit at-risk youths who suffer from suicidal depression, nurse body image issues, gender identity issues, and people that cut themselves. I thought to myself, these are exactly Inga's symptoms. Who is this woman? Perhaps she's a psychologist from whom Mr. Pennington sought advice about Inga some years ago. I reached out to this woman and confessed to her that I was worried for a friend. I also inquired if this Minnesotan woman was a psychologist. I mentioned that I feared that maybe if she knew my friend, there would be a conflict of interest. The Minnesotan woman replied that she's not a psychologist and she wanted to know what bothered me. I then disclosed to her. I didn't provide Inga's name, of course, but I did state that my then unnamed friend's father was originally from Minnesota and that my friend was born and raised in Northern Europe. I didn't specify the exact country though. I also went over the suicidal ideation and the corpse pictures, but I didn't bring up the obsession with the child molesters, the dynamic with the boy at age 13, or the frequently reasserted belief that American men are just itching to rape her. Minnesotan Judy replied,
"I figured out who you're talking about. It's my niece, Inga, isn't it?"
She remarked that this was quite strange because what I had revealed was both familiar and unfamiliar. It was unfamiliar because Judy was not aware that her niece, who dwelt an ocean's distance from her, carried this burden. Yet Aunt Judy said this was familiar in one respect. Judy assembled that website and founded that non-profit organization because the symptoms she described, they were her own. Aunt Judy went on that she herself had attempted suicide in 3 separate instances. This disclosure is even on her Angel File website, though I hadn't read that paragraph prior to contacting her. Judy said that when I described Inga's issues, it was as if I were reciting Judy's own life story. Before I could raise any topic pertaining to the child molester obsession or the phobia of men, Aunt Judy inquired if Inga was bedeviled by an extreme hang-up concerning sex. This startled me. I wanted to know why that was one of the first questions Judy advanced to me. Aunt Judy stated,
"Sexual abuse is common in my family."
Both an uncle and cousin of hers killed themselves, and the other relatives long suspected the uncle and the cousin were child molesters. In the beginning, Aunt Judy told me she planned on talking with Matt Pennington, her half-brother, about this. But then, she quickly changed her mind, imparting that although she grew up with Matt Pennington, he remained a stranger to her.
"He is terribly secretive and doesn't show emotion. His face is usually blank,"
Judy said. Judy said that this wasn't a moral condemnation, but she doesn't respect his judgment. Therefore, she concluded, she planned on having a heart-to-heart directly with Inga. Aunt Judy went through the following cycle. About every 3 weeks or so, she told me she would finally have the talk with Inga. Then, she would say something else came up and defer this plan. She didn't go through with it. Then, unsolicited, Judy started emailing about something else. First, she wrote about Matt Pennington, then Matt Hockinen, learning the truth about the circumstances under which he was born, him being the result of their mother's extramarital affair. As you can imagine, Matt took this much harder than Inga let on to Professor Rothbard and I. Through his own sleuthing, Matt tracked down his biological father and met him, but the man wanted nothing to do with him. Crushed by this, Matt thereafter departed for Tromsø, which he had made his new home. Judy was unclear on the precise reason why Matt changed his name to Pennington, other than that it must have been, at least in part, due to his feeling forsaken by the man who raised him. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Aunt Judy emailed me that she herself was sexually abused as a child by Walt. In Judy's estimate, Matt must have been aware of the sexual abuse the entire time, but when she tried to talk with Matt about it, he replied, unconvincingly, that he could not recall anything of that nature. Shaken by the news, I asked Judy if Inga had ever been left alone with Walt. Judy, she replied yes. During Matt's return visits to the United States, Walt had babysat Inga alone on a number of days. I don't doubt Inga's story about her friend forcing himself on her when both he and she were 13 years old, but that does not account for the enduring focus on child molesters specifically. I began to wonder if maybe, when Inga ascribed her fears about men and sex to the incidents from when she was 13, she still omitted another likely cause, something that happened to her years earlier. Over the next few weeks, Aunt Judy went through a new phase. She told me that she would initiate that caring talk with Inga after she took care of her own business with her own father. Judy wrote out a draft of a snail mail letter she planned on sending to her parents. She emailed the draft to me, and I retained possession of it. The letter is to confront both parents with a description of the sexual abuse in graphic detail. While most of the grievances are directed toward Walt Hockennan, the letter also reproaches Dorothy Pennington Hockennan for looking the other way, being an enabler to Walt. Yet, at the last minute, Aunt Judy decided against sending the note. She rationalized that Dorothy is too old, and therefore such a distracting topic would harm her health physically. At that point, Aunt Judy became somewhat uncommunicative and rude toward me. I suspect it finally occurred to Judy that if she looked further into the matter with her niece, she might uncover something incriminating about Matt Pennington, and then there would be no plausible deniability. I was alone when I tried to engage in that compassionate talk with Inga. She had previously told me of the times her ex-boyfriends pegged her as lying, a cheating whore, and she just laughed. I didn't express moral disapproval. I informed her that I was concerned her symptoms had taken over, and that this was unsafe. She reacted as if my confronting her was the most evil, hateful atrocity perpetrated, and my speaking with her on this aroused more anxiety from her than did her once believing that Sayo intended to assault her. Then, suddenly, in the conversation, she feigned memory loss. She pretended that there was no retention of her having told me anything of her past, and she wanted me to act as if there could not possibly be any connection between her corpse pictures and what she said previously of wanting, since childhood, to be dead. For my own safety, I had to sever contact from Inga, but I never stopped caring. And, going on into 2012, she kept insinuating herself into my social sphere. People who I thought were my friends behaved as Inga's sycophants when she was around, and tacitly treating the public morbid gestures they witnessed as if they were safe. Prominent business executives and prominent elected officials indulged in that. It was just nauseous. To avoid any run-ins with Inga, I had to be a complete recluse. In the summer of 2012, Inga returned to Tromsø to keep near her mother. Entertaining the prospects that maybe the passage of time might have offered new insights, I decided, in July of 2015, to think over the events once again. At that point, I noticed Inga posting on the Bigger Pockets real estate networking forum. She finally stopped using the photoshopped corpse pictures. She looks alive and is beautiful again, except that her grin looks more maniacal in a new photo than it looked any time I saw her up close before. The smile, it seems phony, and reminded me of the Jokers from Batman. I wanted to believe that Inga ditching the corpse photos signified recovery on her part, but she unmistakably underwent another conspicuous change. She is now going by the name of Inga Johansson Pennington. People might consider that a touching tribute on Inga's part to someone important to her, but given Inga's obsession with child molestation, and in consideration of what Aunt Judy revealed about the patriarchs of the family, I think the name change is not a good omen. It seems to me to be yet another morbid gesture, albeit one less obvious than those previously exhibited. On the Bigger Pockets forum, Inga happily proclaims herself as an ambitious real estate investor who owns a parking garage. I remembered what she had told me earlier, that she tries to come across as having lots of authority and responsibility, overselling it because if everyone projects that image of her, no one will question her. She is trying to network with people near her. If those people become very close, they're in danger that Inga may repeat the Seo incident with them. I noticed Inga's mother, Lilith Johansson, on Facebook. As I think that Inga already mentioned me to her, I sent Lilith a private message reintroducing myself. As gingerly as I could, I told her of the morbid gestures Inga had displayed during her stay in Honolulu, and I gave her the URL to the murder threat Inga wrote for her. Hours later, Lilith, she Facebook blocked me. It felt tempting at that juncture to say,
"If Mrs. Johansson is going to be like that, then I guess she doesn't deserve a heads up about the hazards that await."
But the truth is that Inga's mother is not the only one at risk. Inga could falsely accuse someone in Tromsø of sexual harassment or violence towards her, ruining that person's life. I wrote to Tromsø police about the still online homicide threat. These police, they were not especially responsive. I additionally wrote to the police in Minnesota on this matter. First, I mentioned Aunt Judy informing me of her having been sexually abused by Walt Hockinen, and of my storage of the emails that describe this in detail. I then explained that Judy's niece, Inga, in Tromsø, still has online her murder threat against her mother. I went over Inga's fixation on child molesters and how, subsequent to learning new details from Aunt Judy, I'm concerned that Inga's morbid gestures might be connected to what Walt Hockinen allegedly did to Aunt Judy. And finally, I explicated my concern over the remaining perils of Inga's condition going untreated. The Minnesotan police told me that they cannot take action here unless Aunt Judy approaches them herself. Sadly, it's unlikely she'll ever come forward. I fear Inga very much, but that does not diminish my wish for her well-being. Absent of intervention, it is likely that she will one day do something extremely dangerous, possibly acting on a threat against her mother, or falsely accusing someone else of a crime. And the target of any violence on her part could still be someone other than her mother. It could be someone to whom she feels emotionally attached. Inga might take this dangerous action tomorrow, or she might do this in 15 years from the day that you hear this. But if there is no compassionate intervention, it will happen. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. And geez, the part about Inga reciting the Nazi YouTube video, that was really out of my comfort zone. And just when you thought the puns couldn't go any fewer, hey? I know, making fun of neo-Nazis just isn't right. That was a good one, right? You have to admit, that was a good one guys, come on. You did not see that coming, right? Alright, I'll stop, I'm sorry. It's torture for some of you guys, I know. I have to apologize because, I mean, some of you guys really love it, some of you guys really hate it. There's a real split down the middle with you guys with these puns, so you know what, I'm just going to keep doing them, and you know, if you want to just ignore me, go ahead, just ignore me, I'm okay with it. A big thank you goes to the Hive member that bravely shared his story for us all here, and honestly mate, I hope you're doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and well, I guess you could say that some dating apps tend to be a little dangerous. 2016 baby, starting off the new year with a bang. Oh man, I hope you guys had a wonderful break, and you know, I hope everything just went well for you guys. I mean, I had a really restful time and it was great to just kick back and relax, and I'm feeling revitalized and, you know, energized and restored. And you know, today when I started recording this video, I was just feeling great again. I was just feeling excited about 2016 and about what's in store, and oh man, I just couldn't wait to do this this video. And yeah, 2015 was great, and it was great to have a rest, and I'm just so excited guys. So I hope you guys had a wonderful break, and yeah, it's good to be back. So yeah, on that note, thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here. And honestly guys, I hope you're all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also guys, please do me a favor. This happened in October of this year. My two friends and we decided to go camping for a few days. It was around 2 PM when we arrived at Cannock Chase, which is a huge woodland area in the UK. The main reason we chose here is because my friend and I, Emma, we're really into listening to scary stories and creepypastas, and
Yo, what's going on guys, the COD Kittens here, bringing you a little bit of Minecraft gameplay. As you just saw, I showed you what the spawner can do. Now I'm going to show you how to make it. This is literally like the easiest thing you can possibly make when it comes to XP farms. So this is everything you're going to need. Pick 2 buckets of water, lava bucket, 1 redstone torch, 1 dispenser. You're going to need 2 redstone repeaters, 1 sticky piston, any kind of block you want, some torches, glass is optional, redstone, and a button. So, get started. The center point here will be the mob spawner itself, so we want to dig out 4 blocks in each direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright. I'll use torches as the marker. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. That's gonna be 4. I'll mark these so I don't confuse anyone here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we're gonna hollow this room out really quick. I'll fast forward through this part. Alright, so we just hollowed this room out. 4 blocks in each direction from the spawner. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so let's cover this door up a little bit more. This wall, I guess I should say. So, this room is going to be closed off eventually. You're never going to walk in it after we're done. But the next step is to remove 1 layer of the floor. I'm going to put some torches up on the wall just so it doesn't get dark in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can do that as well. Alright, there we go. 1 more layer of the floor. Let's get back onto peaceful mode because that's annoying. So, let's see, what's next? Alright, we're going to take the 2 water buckets we have, put 1 in each corner, and if you look where the water stops, that's where we're going to be mining out. So just mine out all of these points exactly where the water stops.
talks.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Rocky, and we're once again doing another Minecraft video. Today we're presenting you guys my top 10 XP farms. So essentially guys, in this video I'm going to be showcasing you guys 10 different XP farm designs in order to help you guys get a lot of XP in Minecraft Survival. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you do at any point, please be sure to drop a like and a favorite on this video, and as well subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. In addition, check out the creators of the XP farms that can be found in the description, and there will also be tutorials on how to create these XP farms as well. But without further ado, thank you guys so much for your support, and I hope you enjoy.
what's going on, guys? It's Relic, and today I'm going to show you guys my top 5 favorite XP farms in Minecraft. So to start us off, we have the new EXP farm. Now, I think I'm probably going to need to turn down my sound for this, actually. I'm going to go all the way to 0%, but there still is a little bit of sound. And all of these downloads will be in the description, but I'll kind of show you guys around these. And it will have all of the creators in the description as well to give them all credits. But I don't know them off the top of my head, but they will be in the description. So this first one is kind of like a butterfly, actually. So it's pretty pretty, and yeah, I guess that does make sense. Pretty. And I'll kind of show you guys the inside right here. Very basic. It does not actually have mob spawners in it. Mobs just spawn because it's dark. So if you're kind of minimal on resources, you can build something like this, just not as super high-tech as this. But as you can see, they take a lot of fall damage, so you can punch them to death. So each punch will kill all of them. My bad. I don't know why I said my bad. I just messed up talking. Like, oh, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean it. Oh my gosh, these creepers are taking a lot of damage. But as you can see, you know, considering they're taking falls, some of them do take a lot more hits than others. And I don't know if this creeper... Wow, this creeper must have somehow not took fall damage. What the heck? Well, this is why it's number 5, guys. As you can see. But, yeah, it's still a really nice XP farm. As you can see, they come down really fast, so you do get a lot of XP from it, and as well as all the minerals from it. And actually, I should probably be in game mode 0, huh? But as you can see, I just got 23 XP from this. I think I did have a little bit that I did off camera. But yeah, moving on to number 4. Which number 4 is the automatic XP farm. All of them are pretty much called the same thing. But this is a very different styled XP farm. This XP farm is actually an AFK one. So you do get XP pretty fairly slow. But the thing is, you can break this block, and then you just let the zombies come at you. Zombies. Go. Oh. Open the fence first. And then, yeah, they come at you, and the wolves just bite them, and you just get XP like this. It's very slow, like I said. Well, not very slow, but pretty slow. But the thing is you can just AFK for, you know, 1,000,000 hours, and you'll just get XP slowly, and this is zombie. Okay. So, you know, you're just sitting here, bloop, and they die. Like, it's great. So, if you're into kind of like, I don't know, idle games. If you know what idle games are, they're kind of like flash games. You just grind up and you don't do anything. You just sit there and level up for no reason. But yeah, it's kind of like this. So like you can see, the spawn rate is pretty slow, but it does get the job done if you burp for like a few hours. So it's definitely different, but it does work, and I do like it because, like I said, I do like idle games. And I can kind of show you guys around this. Basically, oh, and it does give you armor in this chest in case, you know, you're scared you're gonna die, but you don't even need it. So you just come in here, and as you can see, there's only one spawner, and they have to go through a giant route. So that's why sometimes the zombies don't get there for a while. In fact, I guess maybe they weren't spawning for a second. Now if we come back, I'm sure there will be a zombie or two, maybe. There, maybe. Oh, okay, they're coming up now. There we go. Come on, Jambies. But as you can see, they come up here, and then, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Zombie. They come up, and then they take fall damage, so they're at one hit, so then the wolves can just bite them, and you get the EXP. So, I'd like to demonstrate it one more time, but geez, that is bugging out right now. Oh, actually, one more thing I need to point out. If you do want to download this map, these wolves, they're not your wolves, they're the creator's wolves. So you actually have to spawn in your own wolves. But yeah, so let's just go into game mode 0, and you can see this real quickly. Come on, Mr. Zambi. Bloop. Alright, so on to number 3. Number 3 is XP farm. Now this is the craziest, fastest EXP farm I've ever seen. But it is very generic, and unfortunately I actually cannot go in creative, and I don't have too many items. So we can kind of just tunnel up here to show you guys what's going on. And you can see this guy totally cheated because I have 111 chickens. So he cheated, but it's not a cheatable world. So, you know, whatever, bro, fine. It's not like I need cheats. But, alright. Can I get, like, a good spot where I can actually show you guys what is going on? Okay. So as you can see, mobs spawn from all of those angles. They spawn from all 3 of these, and then they ride up. come down here and take fall damage. Yep, so that's how it works. As you can see, I guess there's just a crap ton of mobs that can spawn down there, and they come up, fly down, and hit the bottom. So it's just like, it's pretty much just like number 5, except this one is like on steroids, because you get so much so fast. I don't know how, but you do. And now I'm gonna have to kind of tower down, unfortunately. So, stand by for some technical difficulties. In fact, alright, I can take this fall damage now, because I got a splash pot, yeah! So as you can see, there's so many skeletons, and we're just gonna throw one little pot in, and just so much XP. Like, look at me! Look at that! In fact, oh, there we go. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful! Look at the XP, it's chasing me around, and if I let this all absorb, I'd probably... Oh, okay, there we go. Actually, it's pretty much done. But as you can see, this is crazy fast. And in fact, you heard the skeletons keep hitting the ground, but for some reason, when I start recording, they just don't want to come down. Mr. Scary Bunch. But yeah, really great XP farm, freaking amazing. And now number 2, I was very contemplating between 3, 2, and 1. But this is the number 2 one I picked. It's an Enderman farm, and, you know, who doesn't need Ender Pearls? And you can just punch them, and they all die. Now, this is just fantastic. The only thing, yeah, it's really fast, but you do have to walk around and punch them like this. So you have to be paying a decent amount of attention. You can't just let them sit at one spot. You have to walk around and punch them. So it is really quick and really fast at spawning them, as you can see. But, you know, you do have to put some work for it. And I don't know why we're allowed to actually walk in here, because I feel like I might, like, die by accident. But as you can see, yeah, this is crazy fast. And, yeah, like I said, who doesn't need Ender Pearls? Ender Pearls are always amazing to have. So, this is number 2. Let me just go into game mode 1 to show you guys kind of what's going on. As you can see, it's very, very tall of just the same thing repeating over and over again. And then there's pistons that can push them off if they get stuck. And yeah, they just kind of spawn here and then they get pushed off, and that's just how it goes. And then, does this catch them or something? That must be what it is. Can they actually grab vines? I did not know that. But yeah, this is number 2, really fast, really amazing. You just have to put forth some effort to definitely get this shit done. So now, on to number 1. Which, number 1, like I said, this is very controversial. Number 3, 2, and 1 are all very good XP farms. So don't say, like, number 1 should be in 3rd place or whatever. But this one is just pretty high tech. It's a little slower because there's only one mob spawner just chilling there. But it is Blazes, so they do give you more XP. And he does have it programmed pretty well. So all you have to do is once you...
We heard a few stories that a black-eyed girl had been spotted here a few times. Kringle were enough to reinforce what my parents had told me. So, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, except for 2 rambunctious youngsters who were absolutely set on waiting up for Santa and their 2 exasperated parents. My brother and I had gotten into the cookie tins, so we were about 10 kinds of wired, and we weren't going to bed until we heard reindeer on the roof. It was going on at about 11:30 at night. Very late for us in those days, when bedtime was around 8 p.m. Our parents were on the verge of bribing us with just about anything to get us out of their hair, when we saw a figure in a red and white suit walk past the living room window. My little brother, all of 4 years at the time, yelled,
"Santa!"
and both of us rushed to the front door. We couldn't understand why my mum suddenly grabbed us and hustled us upstairs, or why Dad was quickly locking the door and rushing for the phone while our Siberian husky stood in the entryway and growled. We whined and complained as we were tucked into bed, in our parents' room, oddly enough. But Mum insisted that we'd been very good and waited up for Santa, and now that he was here, it was time for us to go to sleep. It took some doing on her part, but she convinced us that if Santa knew that we were all still up, we might not get any presents, so we had better go to sleep on the double. So, we burrowed under the covers and squeezed our eyes shut, like all kids pretending to be asleep. In mere minutes, the sugar crash hit, and we fell asleep, for real. Just before I drifted off though, I heard my dad come into the room and say something like,
"Jerry's here."
This was confusing to me, as our neighbour Jerry was a police officer, and I couldn't figure out what the reason he could have been visiting on Christmas for. But I was too sleepy to puzzle it out, and I didn't hear anything more before visions of sugar plums pulled me under. In the morning, our expected gifts from Santa were on the hearth, and we ripped into our pile of gifts with frenzy. It was a good Christmas that year. Dad had won some money in the state lottery, and it had resulted in some much needed renovations to our house, as well as a vacation to Disney World, and a whole lot of very nice presents for the family. He had been in a lottery pool with some friends at his job, and they all received a share of the winnings. It was actually on the local news and everything. It didn't dawn on me until much later that neither of my parents looked like they had slept. They were both drinking coffee, which was highly unusual, and they smiled at our antics and thankful hugs, but otherwise, they weren't as energetic as most mornings. For months, I chalked it up to having to wrangle my brother and I the night before. A few months later, a classmate of mine brought in a newspaper article for current events at the school. For those who've never had to sit through it, this involves students bringing in stories from periodicals and fumbling through a 2-minute presentation of the salient points. I usually halfway slept through this part of the day, but not this time. The article was about a man who'd attempted to break into several houses in the week leading up to Christmas holidays. He'd been arrested on Christmas Eve while trying to break into an occupied home dressed as Santa, and his trial date had just been set for later in the year. As sad as it sounds, that moment was the moment I stopped believing in Santa Claus. I'd previously thought that the red suit was something of a trademark, and surely only Santa himself could wear it. But heck, if any old joker could put on that suit, even one who robbed the houses, then surely, to my young mind, it meant there was no Santa. The pieces didn't fall into place until several years later, when I brought the incident of the very late Christmas Eve up to my mother in conversation. She looked shaken for a minute, but then told me I was probably old enough to know what had actually happened. The man from the newspaper article had been tracking down the people from Dad's lottery pool. He knew they'd all won money, and so would probably have nice new purchases and possibly cash or even expensive holiday gifts squirreled away in their homes. He'd broken into a couple of my dad's co-workers' houses and made off with jewelry and electronics, but he'd never been there when anyone was home. Also, another scary element to this story is that the things he'd stolen, they were sold off for drug money. On Christmas Eve, he'd gotten hopped up on something or other and got into his head to dress up as Santa and to try and hit one more house. Ours. He'd showed up close to midnight, probably thinking we'd all be in bed, and he tried to open the front door. Fortunately, my dad managed to throw the deadbolt in time and called our neighbour, who was a police officer and was on duty at the time. His name was Jerry, and he came over right away. Jerry put the guy in handcuffs right there on the front porch and called for backup. The would-be Santa bandit was hauled away while my brother and I slept in our parents' bed upstairs. I don't know why any thief in his right mind would have tried to enter a house where there were clearly lights on and people awake, especially children. The drugs probably had something to do with it, though I never found out what it was he was on or whether he was carrying any weapons. All I know is that I'm very grateful for my parents being such quick thinkers. Otherwise, that year, Christmas may have turned out very differently.
Number 2.
It was around Christmas time when this happened, so our tree was set up in the living room, and the whole house was decorated as well. My brother and I were both in junior high. He was in 9th grade and I was in the 8th. It was nighttime, around 2 or 3 in the morning, when I woke up because I desperately needed a drink of water, so I quietly left my room and headed to the kitchen. As I turned the corner that opened up into the living room, I saw something incredibly bizarre. Standing in pitch darkness, save for the light coming from the tree, stood my brother in the center of the living room, staring at the Christmas tree. His neck was craned backwards, almost painfully, and he was just staring. His expression was unreadable, and he didn't acknowledge my presence, nor did he look away though. I noticed he was holding something, and as I got closer, I saw he held 3 of the many ornaments that were hanging on the tree. 2 decorative glass bulbs and 1 miniature stuffed Santa ornament, I decided that he just couldn't get to sleep and was admiring the tree, or maybe he'd found the ornaments on the floor and was in the process of putting them back on the tree. So I just kept walking towards the kitchen. I had my back to him as I filled up a cup of water. So I jumped when I heard a loud crack and some rustling of the tree. I quickly looked behind me to see the tree swaying a little bit, and my brother still glued to the same spot, staring upwards. I couldn't figure out what had made that noise, so I watched him, knowing it must have been something he did. And, sure enough, a couple of seconds later, I saw him place one of the ornaments he was holding in his other free hand, and then he violently hurled it towards the tree. He slowly turned his head towards me, and then just stared in my general direction. He didn't say anything, he didn't smile or laugh like it was a joke. He didn't move. It was just eerie, sinister even. I was weirded out, and I decided I didn't want to go back past my brother again to get back to my room. So I made a beeline to the garage and waited out there in one of our unlocked cars for a while with the garage lights on until I deemed it safe to head back inside. It was dead silent. I was terrified he was going to pull a prank on me and turn out the garage lights and lock the door to the house so I couldn't get back inside. But nothing happened. I only waited for about 15 minutes because by now it was very late and I was tired. So I gently opened the car door, walked up the steps to get back inside the house, inched open the door and stepped inside. It took my eyes a minute to adjust to the darkness, but once they did, something sitting on the top of the countertop in the kitchen caught my eye. There, not a foot away from where I stood, sat the third ornament my brother had been holding, a single ruby red glass decorative bulb. I kind of just stood there staring at it for a moment, thinking he was going to pop out at me from somewhere, but he didn't. I peeked around the corner into the living room and saw, to my relief, that my brother, he was gone. He must have gone back downstairs. Nothing else happened that night, but it has stuck with me for a while. What's even weirder though is that my brother doesn't have a history of sleepwalking, and he hadn't done anything like that before or since. And, of course, he doesn't remember anything. It has always creeped me out that even while asleep, he followed me, and he was that close to where I hid in the garage.
Number 1.
My name is Alyssa, and I have a few stories which seem to fit for this channel. But the first one, it's about a doll which my mum bought me when I was a little girl, around 9 or 10 years old. The doll was called Amazing Amy, and there was a big display for it and lots of accessories which you could buy. She bought just the basic kit containing the doll and a few outfits. On Christmas Day, I opened it and I immediately fell in love with it. I carried it everywhere, and I loved how it talked and had a heart display on its chest to display the time. There was also an option to set up an alarm which would prompt it to cry, like a real baby. I carried that doll everywhere I went. My mum returned to the store a few weeks later to purchase a few more items for the doll, and was puzzled when she saw that there was nothing for it, and it seemed like it didn't even exist. She asked the store manager about the doll and its products, and he said that he didn't know anything about it, and that she should check back in at a later time. Of course, she only told me this once I was older, and I still have the doll, and I am now 24 years old. My mum had the doll sitting underneath a panther table which was in the middle of a living room. She would brush its hair into pigtails and kept an old dress of mine from when I was a baby on it. One day though, I noticed that the doll had some dirt on it, and so my mum cleaned its face and placed it on the TV stand. A few days later though, it was dirty once again, as if someone was playing with it. There are only 4 members of my household, which are my parents, myself, and my younger brother, who was 3 years old at the time. This happened when I was 18 and just graduating from high school, so my brother was 15 at the time and he was really into gaming. We kind of just shrugged it off and went on with life. A few years later, and I'm in college and I have a college friend over to study, we finish our studying and are watching an old movie in the living room with the front door open since it's a warm night. It's about 2 or something in the morning when we hear Amy start to talk. We both looked at each other confused and looked on top of the TV to see Amy sitting there. And then she just started to laugh and repeat a phrase. We both booked it into my room, closing the door immediately. We were sitting there on the bed, scared, because I informed my friend that we don't keep batteries in her, the reason being to keep them from corroding. Realizing that we had to go back out there to close and lock the front door, along with turn off the living room TV, I gathered my courage and I pulled my friend along, and we complete these tasks as quickly as possible. Amy, of course, was still in her spot and she didn't speak, which made us feel a little relieved, but we rushed back to my room anyhow. We slept with my TV on, since the sound made us feel at least a little better. A year later, my mum found out that my brother had a girlfriend and thought it would be a good idea to let his girlfriend take Amy, since she had an alarm and was like a real baby who required changing, feeding and bottles. So my mum put batteries in it and set the alarm for early in the morning. She told my brother's girlfriend,
"Since you want to be with my son, this will make you think twice before thinking of becoming intimate."
My brother's girlfriend shrugged it off and took Amy home, knowing that my mother actually had a point. My brother received a call early that morning to come and pick up the doll, since she was freaked out. My brother and I rushed over to the house, which was just a few blocks away, and I took Amy from his girlfriend. I immediately began questioning her about the dirt and the blue paint on the doll's face and hands, and she shook her head saying,
"I don't know. I woke up to the crying alarm and I saw that, and when I went to turn it off, it really freaked me out."
We got home and told my mum immediately, and we could never figure out exactly what happened that day. But even to this day, Amy manages to get dirty all the time, and we can't explain why this happens. But whenever I try to give her to a relative, they always call me back up and ask me to take it back or come by and comment at how weird things have happened, and they don't want it anymore. This may sound a little fake, but these are true experiences, and they're still puzzling me and my family. I still have the amazing Amy doll, and find little to nothing on the internet when I go to look it up, which makes it even more weird. This, by far, is the strangest Christmas present I've ever received. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. And you know, with all this talk about Christmas, it made me think about something.
Number 3.
A little backstory before we get into things. I grew up in upstate New York, and it only made sense that I would return to my quiet little part of the world after I got out of the Marines in 2007. The only problem is that I didn't have much money, but the good news was that my grandfather had an old pool behind camper that he told me I could have until I got on my feet. So, being on my own, I decided that I would spend about a year in the pool behind a few acres of woods that I had bought from a friend while I was in the Marines. Taxes had been paid for the year, so the only thing I had to do was pay for gas and propane. I managed to avoid looking like a crazy mountain man by showering and washing my clothes at a local truck stop, and I even got a pretty decent job working security. I filled the rest of my time working odd jobs for extra cash. Alright, now onto the main story. It was mid-April, and I was sitting next to a nice low fire while listening to my battery-powered radio and watching nightfall in the woods. I had gotten myself a nice dinner at the diner down the road, and I didn't have any work for the next few days. Generally speaking, I didn't see anyone in the woods for weeks at a time, so I wasn't expecting it when I heard a scream break the silence. I shot up and grabbed my shotgun out of the small camper and checked the chamber to make sure it was loaded. I stood at the edge of the small clearing and strained my eyes to listen for any sounds. It's generally hard to pinpoint a direction of a noise out in the middle of the woods at night. Luckily though, I heard some shouting and cars door slamming, so I knew that sounds had to be coming from the main vehicle trail a short distance from my campsite. I made my way to the trail as fast as I could in the low light, and before I could get halfway there, I heard another clipped scream to my left. I could hear rustling in the brush, and I slowly made my way over to where I thought the noise was coming from. I came out of the woods, right next to a man who had a woman pinned to the ground and another leering man standing just behind him. Shaking from adrenaline, I leveled the shotgun at the guy on top of the woman and growled at him to get off. Now, I'm a pretty big guy, but I have no doubt that the shotgun was the deciding factor in this whole situation. Each of these guys had a solid 30 pounds of muscle on me, and I was 200 pounds, and I was a Marine. I ushered the two idiots back, so I was between them and the woman who was now getting to her feet. It was about now I realized that we had another problem. My cell phone was cheap, and I didn't get reception in the woods, and hers had been broken by these two sickos. There wasn't much I could do other than march these two back to their shitty lifted jeep under the threat of shotgun. I got their license plate number, their names as well, which I was sure were fake, and a description of them and their vehicle. Before the driver got into the vehicle, I lowered the shotgun straight to his crutch. They took off in one direction, and myself and the woman, we made our way back to my campsite. We drove to the DEC station as soon as possible, and we reported the entire incident. It turns out that the guy I was threatening was the young woman's ex-boyfriend. They had all been out having a few drinks when the third wheel in the situation got a little too handsy for her liking. When she said something to her ex-boyfriend, he basically told her to stop being so stuck up and to put out for once. When she refused, the boyfriend took her phone and smashed it on the ground. They both then pushed her into the truck and drove her deeper into the woods. She had waited for them to become complacent before throwing the back door open and jumping out of the Jeep and taking off. Luckily for her, the Jeep was a pile of shit, and the back door, it didn't lock. It was also a stroke of luck that I had happened to be outside when she managed to escape. Fast forward about 7 months, and that woman I helped, she became my wife, and we moved into our first house using the money I'd been living on in the woods to save up. We've been married for 8 years now, and we have 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. I still go out camping in that location every year and hunting, and I haven't seen the Jeep or the potential rapists again. We heard through the grapevine though that they'd been arrested but somehow got off without any actual jail time. I'm assuming they moved either into the city or further away because we haven't seen them again. So to the 2 potential rapists in the Jeep, I know who you are, and for your sake, you better stay away.
Number 2.
This story is about my dad's ex-girlfriend. Her name is Jessica. Some background on her first. She apparently was a friend of my dad's in high school and rekindled some sort of a relationship between them. My parents are divorced, and at the time of this story, I wasn't allowed to contact my own mother for legal reasons, so I was in my father's care. My dad is a very emotionally abusive person, and growing up, we didn't really talk much. We just kind of fought and screamed at each other. He certainly wasn't father of the year, and he would leave me at home for hours at a time sometimes. He also did this to his girlfriend, Jessica. Jessica wasn't the sweetest person either though, and she had this attitude about her that just screamed, "I'm better than you," and that she was the hottest woman in the world or something. This was weird though, because she really wasn't anything to look at. She would constantly start drama with the other housewives in the neighborhood and gossip about them too. Some days, she was a really nice person, but other days, she was just as loathsome as my father. She and my dad would constantly fight over the way the other person treated them. I didn't pay attention to it, but it eventually came to a boil. It was the week of my 16th birthday, and my father was in California for business. So I was left with Jessica, the dogs, and my bird Mary. On Friday, the day he would be coming back, I was fiddling with one of the presents we prepared, and it was getting late. I was in my bedroom passing the time until I heard a rustling noise coming from my dad's room, and then a weird groaning, screaming noise. I was legitimately worried because those noises were from Jessica, and I thought that she was hurt. What I didn't know, however, was that she'd been drinking. She then started screaming like a fucking banshee or something, and I was afraid to go near the room, so I called out,
Hey Jessica? Are you alright in there? Do you need anything?
Apparently, that was an invitation for her to come running at me, a defenseless girl facing off against a 50-year-old woman. She started hitting me and trying to scratch at me. I managed to grab her wrists and tried to get her to tell me why she was doing this. She looked at me dead in the face, and with a low, cold voice she growled, "I'm going to fucking kill you." I had enough. I pushed her off of me and raced into my bedroom, locking the door. Being young, I didn't realize at the time that I should have called the cops, but after a moment or two, I heard my father coming through the door. He must have felt the atmosphere in the air because he called out,
"What the hell is going on?"
I came rushing out in tears, telling him that it was Jessica, that she came out like a madman, slapped me, and threatened to kill me. I was shaking and terrified. I screamed at him and told him that I wanted her out of the house now. I was truly afraid. He just stormed past me and went up the stairs to their room. I don't remember much, but I assume she tried to blame it on me, like I was the one that attacked her or something. All I could remember is that the cops weren't called and we just went to bed. That, however, isn't the end of the story. The next morning, she came into my room as I was watching TV, asking for forgiveness. She was acting as if the whole thing, it was nothing. I told her no, but Dad of course demanded that I forgive her, so I had no other choice. Unfortunately, this would usher in behavior of her doing horrible things to me and then acting like it had been nothing. This went on for some time, but obviously, she and my father broke up and they went on their separate ways. She tried to keep in touch with me though, and I was nice to her out of politeness. It wasn't until I was in my freshman year in college that she would start up again. I had Facebook at the time, but I didn't really use it much because I didn't really like it too much. Plus, I was busy and I barely ever checked it. When I did finally check it though, I received a nasty, childish message from her, all because I didn't accept her friend request. She proceeded to tell me that I was just as nasty and immature as my father, that he and I used her as a slave, even though, apparently, I was her bitching buddy, as she liked to complain about my father and all the other women in the neighborhood. Also, something that really struck a note with me was when she said that if it wasn't for her, that I wouldn't have been in college. The last time I checked, all she did was tell me the school's name. I did the rest. She even called me in the middle of my Drawing 1 class, just to bitch at me. So I proceeded to email her. I told her to never contact me again, and to never contact my dad either, that I didn't appreciate her immaturity, and that I was only nice to her because of my father. Other than that, I never wanted anything to do with her. Since that message, for 2 years, she's tried contacting me on social media, acting as if nothing happened and that we were good friends. I even tried emailing her again, telling her to leave me alone, but she just said I was being crazy. I had since got into contact with my biological mother and told her everything that happened. She just flipped and told me that if she contacted me again, she'll threaten her with a lawsuit. But one day, just a few weeks ago, I was on my YouTube account and I got a message, and lo and behold, it was her. All it said was, "Hello, nice blue hair." I had had enough and I told her off and then called my mother in tears. She was fuming that this woman wouldn't leave me alone and she just wouldn't get the hint that I didn't want to talk to her. All my mother told me was that she was going to settle this once and for all. Since then, I haven't gotten any messages for weeks, but I know my mother didn't do anything illegal. She probably just scared her off. At least, I hope so.
Number 1.
I'm a 28-year-old mother of a 4-year-old, and right now, I'm in a relationship with a man who is not my daughter's father. 3 years ago, about 8 months after I had left my daughter's father due to abuse, I started to feel strange. I felt increasingly paranoid, and almost as if I were being watched for weeks. One night, my sister asked if she could borrow my car because she was having issues with hers. I told her this was fine, as long as she brought it back before 4 AM because this was the time I take my boyfriend to work. She said that this should be okay. Hours pass by, and I wake up to banging and screaming outside of my window. I jolted awake, heart racing because I had no idea what was going on. I rushed to the front door and continued hearing screaming and banging when I steadied myself and I realized it was my sister who was screaming and banging on the door and window. I let her in, saying, "What the hell is going on?" She says, "Hannah,
Donnie's outside, and in the bushes by your window. He's outside, right now.
I said,
What the fuck?
I looked out the window from my porch and saw my daughter's father standing there, and he had no shirt, no shoes, and he was sweating, as if he'd been out there running all night. I immediately rushed to call the police and check on my daughter. I explained to the dispatcher that he's been abusive towards me in the past, and that he hadn't been into any other drugs other than marijuana before I left him. This night though, he did seem like he was high on something. The police were there in 5 minutes, guns drawn and yelling for him to get down. He refused, claiming that I had told him to come over and to see our daughter. Mind you, I had not spoken to him the entire 8 months after I left him, and my daughter didn't even know him at this point. And it was 4:30 in the fucking morning. My nephew was asleep in the back area of our house, and he was seriously ready to kick some ass for his mother finding my daughter's father in our bushes. I told the police that I had not spoken to him and that he's lying. They basically did nothing but slapped him with a trespassing citation and told him to leave. The police stayed to make sure he left, but he didn't. He acted as if he were leaving and came back to the house to talk. I threatened to call the police again if he didn't leave, and this time he left. Fast forward to the next day. My neighbour is our gardener, and as usual, he was cutting our grass. He passes by the bush that Donnie was hiding in, and he saw a medium-sized steak knife hidden there. My body literally went cold. It's as if the last few weeks of me feeling as though someone was watching me and following me started to flash through my mind. He was there at that particular time because he knew I'd be leaving the house to take my boyfriend to work. I have an idea of what he was planning to do to me, and it sent me pretty much into a hysteria. That man, he was going to kill me, and who knows what he could have been planning on doing to my daughter. I wish I could say that he got locked away, or that he left, or that we moved, or something, but all of that would just be lying. He's still out there, and I'm still here. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video.
Number 5.
About 2 years ago, in the summertime, my family and I went to a popular camping site in North Norfolk. I've been there 2 or 3 times before, and my family always have a good time there. We were planning to stay there for 6 nights, but on the 3rd night, I experienced this. It was about 3 AM, and I just randomly woke up. I was on the verge of falling back to sleep, but in the distance, I heard someone screaming. Where our tent was set up, there were fields and forests surrounding our section of the campsite we were on. I listened intently, and I heard the scream again. It was someone screaming, "Help." I know it wasn't anyone else at the campsite, because it was too far away. It was quite faint, but wherever the person was, they were screaming at the top of their lungs. It sounded like they were about a mile away or so, but you could still just about hear it. My mum was asleep in the next sleeping pod in our 4-man tent. I woke her up and told her what I could hear, but I think she was just too tired and annoyed that I woke her up in the middle of the night, and so she just fell back asleep again. I could still hear whoever it was shouting for help in the distance. I debated whether to go out and investigate, but I was too scared and there were just too many pathways and fields surrounding the campsite. I wouldn't know where to look, and I was a 13-year-old girl, so I was very vulnerable. I didn't really think of calling for help or the police or anything, because what if it was just someone messing around or something like that? I eventually drifted off back to sleep, but it makes me feel guilty knowing that someone could have been in real danger and I could have helped them. I never heard any more after that night. I've told some of my friends this story and my family that was camping with me too. They were as creeped out as I was.
Number 4.
During high school, age 14 or so, my mates and I used to go camping in the woods and fields about a mile from the closest road my friend lived on. Most weekends, we would gather a few together, smoke and drink and just listen to music. One night, my two friends Simon and Stuart and we were waiting for our friend Nick to join us after a date with a girl. It was getting dark and we were sitting in our tents as it was raining at the time. We were just smoking and talking and just kicking back. The area was heavily wooded, and every now and then, I swear I could hear quiet footsteps on the leaves around the tent. I kept telling my friends,
Shut up. Listen.
but it always stopped. I was getting paranoid and kept thinking I could see a white figure behind a tree closest to the tent. My friends could see it too, but they just blamed it on the darkness playing with our eyes. I zipped up the tent after a while, as it was freaking me out. After about an hour or so, we all forgot about it, but then we heard a noise. It sounded like something sharp being scraped against tree bark. We all just looked at each other and held our breath. We heard it again though. Simon started putting his shoes on, and I hurriedly did the same. Fuck shoelaces at a time like this, I thought. Without warning, Simon unzipped the tent and just ran outside. I panicked and did the same. Stuart wasn't slow to follow either. We ran in the dark and rain through a field and then the woods until we met the road and walked to my friend's house all scared and shaking. Shortly after we got in, Nick rings us asking where the hell we were, saying he's at the campsite. We shouted down the phone to get the hell out of there and described what we heard. He thought it was a joke and he told us to stop joking around with him and asked where we were. We kept telling him that it wasn't a joke and eventually he left. When he finally got back, we were really relieved, but he told us that he walked around the campsite and the fields to try and find us, and that when he was walking through the woods, he heard footsteps of someone. He called out hello, thinking it was us, but he wasn't met with any reply. He quickly ran back after that, realizing that we were telling the truth, and he ran back to the house. Strangely though, we all went back in the morning and nothing was taken or moved. 14 years later, I still have no idea what that sound was.
Number 3.
I'm a young female attending a small all-women's college in the mountains of Virginia, and ever since I started attending this place, I've had several strange and frightening paranormal experiences. But those are for another day, because as I found out a few months ago, the most frightening monsters, they're always human. I'm a creative writing major, and at my school, all CW majors are required to go on a week-long camping trip. It's sponsored by the program and led by the CW professors. The purpose of the trip is to develop our writing skills by talking to each other and communicating with our professors, away from distractions of technology. We would also have time to do normal camp stuff like fishing, hiking, swimming, canoeing, etc. Now, I'm not much of an outdoor person, but I figured that I might as well get it over with. Plus, students could bring their dog from home, so I brought my dog, Rusi. She's a 3-year-old large, brindle-coloured Great Dane Pipple mix, so she's a big dog, but also the sweetest thing ever. I was the only one who ended up bringing a dog though. So, the group left for the trip, 8 students and 3 professors. When we got there, we all got our tents. Now, the first few days, everything was great. I actually had a fun time and was learning a lot. At breakfast, all the students would be assigned a prompt, i.e. tell the story of this tree, and we would have all day to write a short story in response to it. Then at dinner, we would all read our work and do a group critique. But on the 4th night, I woke up to Rusi growling at the entrance of the tent. I checked my watch. It was 3 AM, so I thought that she might need to use the bathroom or something. I reached my hand to unzip the flap, but Rusi actually nipped my hand and then growled when I tried to open the flap. I was startled. Rusi hardly ever even barked at me, let alone bit me. So I figured there must be something outside that she doesn't want me to go near, as she was a very protective dog despite her sweet nature. My tent had a small section in the front that was covered by clear plastic to serve as a window, so I looked out to see that the clearing where all the tents were, there were 2 large figures going from tent to tent. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, but eventually I was able to make out that both figures were male, and they were going to each tent, unzipping it, sticking their heads in, then zipping the tent back up and moving to the next one. My sleepy brain decided that it was just 2 of the professors checking to make sure all the students were accounted for and that there was nothing to worry about. I started to pet Rucy's head to try and calm her.
It's okay, girl. It's just Professor Cass, and...
My blood went cold, and I froze when the realization hit me. We only had one male professor with us on this trip, and furthermore, he wasn't allowed to do night checks. Only the female professors could. I was terrified, and I scrambled for the walkie-talkie I'd been given on the first day. All the students had been given a walkie-talkie that connected to the one the professor had. We were required to carry them with us all the time in case we got lost or something. I hit the button and prayed someone would answer.
Hello? Hello? Pick up, please.
I whispered into the walkie-talkie as Rucy and I kept our eyes on the 2 men, who were now standing around talking to each other. I couldn't hear what they were saying though, and at first no one answered. I grew even more scared, but then the sleepy voice of the male professor answered.
Hello? Who is this? Professor Cass, it's Amy. Amy, do you know what time it is? Professor Cass, there's people in our campsite. I don't know who they are, but they're looking in the tents. What?
All traces of sleep and annoyance in his voice were gone. He sounded alert, and he sounded mad. I heard rustling on the other end.
I'm coming. Sit still. Stay quiet. I'll call Lynn and Bo and let them know. Be safe.
He hung up, and I let myself breathe. For a moment, I was sure that everything was going to be alright. But as I looked outside, all the fear returned. Both men had returned to one of the tents and opened it. I watched in horror as one of the men actually began to duck inside of the tent. I knew the girl who was in there. She was only 5'2" and really tiny. Oh shit, what should I do? Then, all of a sudden, all the fear went away and it was replaced by a deep, burning rage. I thought to myself,
how dare these fuckers try and hurt us?
I yanked open the tent flap and screamed at the top of my lungs. Simultaneously, Rucy took off at full speed towards the men and was on them in seconds. I guess she bit one of them because he screamed really loud. This must have woken the girl in the tent because there was another scream, but this one was female. The man who was in the tent stumbled out and Rucy turned her attention on him. She lunged at him, but he hit her across the face with a large stick. She rolled to the ground, and this gave both men a chance to take off into the woods. Rucy got to her feet and took off after them, barking her head off. I scrambled into the clearing, barefoot, and in my Pokemon nightshirt and Scooby-Doo pajama bottoms. I ran to the girl's tent, and she was thankfully alright, terrified and hysterically sobbing, but she was okay. The commotion woke all the other girls, who emerged from their tents to see me hugging my friend and trying to call for my dog. I told them what had happened, and they were understandably freaked out. Professor Lynn and Bo also arrived, and they were in the cabin down the hill, so it did take them a minute to get to us, and they tried to comfort us. Professor Cass, who was required to sleep at the other end of the campground, arrived with the school van and herded us all into it. I protested though. Rucy still wasn't back yet, and I was afraid the 2 men had hurt my dog, but Professor Cass literally shoved me into the van, closed the door, and gunned the van down the mountain to the ranger station. I wasn't happy we had left Rucy, but my anger was wearing off, and I started to cry and shake. When we got to the ranger station, I tried to tell them what happened, but I couldn't stop crying, so everyone else had to fill in the blanks for me. A group of rangers went out to search for the men, while a few more stayed behind with us. They made us hot chocolate and wrapped us up in blankets and told us to try and get some rest on the couches in the lobby. I didn't think I would be able to sleep, but I passed out at some point, as did all the girls, and I woke up at around 5:30 to my dog licking my face. When I opened my eyes, I started crying again because I was so happy to see Rucy safe and sound. Apparently, the rangers had found her wandering the woods with a torn piece of bloody denim in her mouth. She had a few cuts and was in desperate need of a bath, but was no worse for wear. The rangers had also gathered all of our stuff from the campsite, and the group left to head back to the college at 6 o'clock in the morning. Looking back at the incident, I'm still amazed that it took place in only about 5 minutes, because it really felt like hours. I still have so many questions. Who were those 2 men? What did they want? What were they trying to do to my friend? Why didn't they try to come near my tent? The 2 men, they were never found to my knowledge, and I really don't want to think too hard about what they had planned for my friend. But as for why they didn't come near to my tent, well, honestly, I think I was just lucky. We were assigned tents randomly, and I got the one that was dark green, while all the others were bright shades of yellow, orange or pink. Also, while the other girls set up their tents in the clearing so they could be closer to the fires, I had set up my tent further back into the tree line and next to some very large bushes. This is because both Russi and I snore like freight trains, and I didn't want to disturb the others, so I'm pretty sure they just didn't see my tent. I try not to let myself dwell on what could have been, because all I know is that thanks to Russi, we all got down from that mountain safely. Oh, and as for Russi, she now enjoys monthly care packages of doggy treats and squeaky toys from all the girls on that trip. Life for her has never been better.
Number 2.
A few years ago, I was staying in Canada with my parents. I live in Quebec and it was summer. I was out camping with 2 of my friends in a forest about 4 miles from our school. While we were setting up our camp, all of us felt a little bit uneasy, which was weird, like we were being watched by someone or something, but we just shrugged it off and we went to bed. We were woken up at about 3 o'clock in the morning by a horrific sound. It sounded like a low-pitched growl and a screech kind of at the same time. Although a little fearful, we decided to investigate. Luckily, my friend Bill, he brought a bow and a quiver full of arrows with him. So we took that along with us just in case. We kept getting closer and closer to the sound until we came across an old, creaky building, almost ready to collapse. As soon as we set foot in there, the screeching just stopped. We heard footsteps going along the second floor, and then a soft thump like a door slowly closing or something. We slowly crept upstairs and opened the door. That, though, was a big mistake. I'll try to describe this thing as best as I can recall it. It was really thin and tall. It had long arms and what seemed like 2 jointed legs, like the ones horses have. It had a dented skull, blank white eyes, and huge jaws full of really disturbing sharp teeth. After the door opened, it kind of slowly backed away and just started staring at us. We paused for what seemed like 15 seconds or so, and then it just started screeching and sprinting at us. Despite his terror, Bill was able to shoot an arrow at the creature's eye, stunning it, and it bought us 1 or 2 seconds to run as fast as we could down the stairs, out the door, and we hid in some nearby bushes, waiting for it to come out. But it never did. So, after about 10 minutes of silently waiting, we snuck out of the bushes and made our way back to our camp. As you can probably understand, we were on edge all the way back to our campsite. When we got back to our campsite, we found it completely torn apart by something, which I can only guess was the creature we saw. We packed up as quickly as we could and we got out of there. We drove back home safely that night, but I'm never, ever going back to those woods again. Not even if I have the whole Canadian Army on my back. Whatever that thing was, it was fucking terrifying.
Number 1.
I'll start with some background information. I live in Finland, and first of all, let me tell you 2 things about Finland. We have a very low crime rate. Even some of the smallest crimes get a story in the newspapers. Another thing is that here, all men have to do military service. That means you're able to choose between army, civilian service, or prison. I'm a female, and I decided a long time ago that I wanted to go to the army. I managed to get to the officer candidate training. After that, to become an officer, it requires working for the army. I decided that I wanted to work there for some amount of time. I thought to myself, it's a paying job, right? We were camping in the woods with new arrivals. As a camp leader, that meant that I was just sitting around and watching the recruits digging foxholes. These recruits had to dig the ground so that they were able to stand in a hole that would protect them from open fire. After this, we let them play with their guns. We have a special ammo. It won't injure you, it just hurts a lot. Because they're new arrivals, most of them, they don't really give a shit. And they're only there because they have to be. This means you can't really expect anything from them. At this time, I was already an officer, and I was there with 2 corporals, which means the lowest NCO rank in the Finnish Defence Forces. To make this a bit easier to understand, I had the most training and was the highest military rank, so I was in charge. After me came the corporals. Their names were Erickson and Jackson. So we three were the leaders. I'm a pretty good friend with Erickson, so I was happy to have him there. Like I told you in the beginning, we have a really low crime rate, and that's why it's okay to take about 2 handfuls of guys who have no idea what they're doing into the middle of the woods. We always make the first camp at the same place, so that the people who live nearby know it's best not to come near the camp at that time. So that's probably enough with the backstory. Now on to the strange night. So, we were sleeping in a tent in the middle of nowhere, and at night there's always someone awake observing the grounds. It was around 3 AM when one of the new arrivals came to wake me up. He seemed to be really scared and told me that he saw movement in the woods. I thought it was probably just some type of animal or some people lost or something. I asked him if he was sure that he really saw something, because I really didn't want to get up for nothing. He told me that he was sure though. I woke up Erickson and told him about the situation, and he also got up immediately. We went out of the camp and I got this feeling that somebody was watching me. The moment we got out from the tent, it was kind of too silent. We both had our guns and we started to walk around the trees. I told myself that we were looking for a bear or a deer or some other animal, and all we had to do was scare it away. I still had this really bad feeling that it wasn't the case though. About 10 minutes went by and we found nothing, so we went back to the camp. The new arrival, who woke me up, he was still scared, so I took the rest of his guard. He and Erickson, they both went back to sleep, and I stayed in front of the tent watching around. I knew I had to be up in about an hour or so, but I really didn't mind. After 15 minutes, I started to hear something. It was walking sounds. Or not even walking sounds. Rather, the kind of sound that comes when someone is trying to sneak in the woods, but fails. I didn't want to wake up Erickson again, so I thought I'd just go and see who was there, and I would tell them the situation and ask them to go away. I still had this really bad feeling though about this whole situation. Like I told you earlier, we were in the middle of nowhere, and the people who lived the closest never bothered us. Again, I walked around a little while and saw nothing. I was starting to go back to our tent when I saw someone standing in front of it. I stopped and stared at him. He was just standing there and looking around. I told myself that he was probably just lost. I took a few steps closer before I saw that there were 2 of them. The other one, he was peeking inside the tent. This was enough for me. I walked over to the guys and told them directly who I am and what we were doing and asked them to go away. This is the point that things got really weird. They didn't look guilty, they just smiled. The other one, he told me that they were really sorry and they were just lost. They asked me if I could just show them the way to the main road where their car was parked. I showed them the direction with my hand, but then they told me that I needed to walk with them a little while so that they would be sure that they were going in the right direction. I knew this wasn't right. I told them that I was looking for the tent and that I could wake up Jackson and Erickson, 2 really nice guys, to show them the way. Both of them got this really angry look on their face.
But we want you to come with us. We didn't know that there would be a really nice lady here. I bet you're a fighter.
As this guy was speaking, the other man took a big knife from his pocket and showed it to me.
Now, be quiet and come with us.
He said this really calmly. At this point, I started to get scared. I had military training, but I had no training for this kind of situation. I'm 170 centimeters tall, and these guys were about 190 centimeters each. I had my gun, but these guys were really close, and it would be difficult to actually pull the gun out quick enough. I spent 2 seconds thinking about my options, and then I heard the tent zipper open. The men froze. It was Erickson. He asked what the hell was going on. I took that chance to take my gun and point it at the men. I told Erickson to call the military police. At that moment, both men, they started running. I shot one of them in the foot, but obviously it didn't do too much damage because they just kept running. After a few seconds, they were gone. We called the garrison to come pick us up and woke up all the new arrivals and told them to pack up their tents. Unfortunately, we never heard anything about those 2 men after that, and we were never allowed to tell the new arrivals what really happened. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. When I was about 8, I moved into a new house located in Illinois. My dad was a chef, so he was never home, and my mum lived in Illinois as well, as they were broken up. The house, it was literally located in the middle of nowhere. There were about 3 other houses beside us, but we lived on the very top of the hill. Every day, I had to walk up this giant hill to get to my house. One day, I was walking up the hill and I saw what looked like a person looking out of my bedroom window, cupping their hands around their eyes. I freaked out and refused to go inside all night until my dad came home. When my dad came home, he reassured me that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The following weekend, I was left by myself for about 20 minutes while my dad went to get pizza. We lived about 30 minutes from town, but my dad always sped. I was on my dad's computer playing some games when I heard what sounded like rustling from the attic. Me, being the stupid 8-year-old I was, assumed it was a squirrel or something. Later, when my dad got home, he ran inside the house, pale and rushing for the home phone. I asked what was wrong, and he said that there was a lady on top of our roof laying down, smiling at him, and she looked really demented. He proceeded to call 911 and told them what happened. The police arrived about 15 minutes after he called. They looked around, but they found no evidence of anyone being on our property, so they kind of just dismissed it. The next day, which was Saturday, I stayed home by myself while my dad went to pay his bills. I slept in until about 12, and when I woke up, I saw a woman peeking her head around my door. I stared at her for a while, trying to process what was happening because I just woke up, so I had no idea if I was just imagining this. But then I realized I wasn't. I sat up fast and just started screaming, and the lady ran off. My dad let me have a softball bat in my room, just in case there ever was an intruder. I grabbed my bat and walked around the house looking for her, but I never found her. I was horrified. I called my dad and he came home immediately. He called the police again and they arrived very fast. As I explained what happened, they heard rustling in the attic. They asked my dad if it was okay for them to check the attic. My dad, condescendingly, said,
"That's fine, just be careful. I think there's squirrels up there."
They climbed up and we didn't hear anything for a solid 5 minutes. But then we heard 2 officers yell,
"Get on the fucking ground, now!"
Then one of the officers came down and told us to go outside, so we did. About 5 minutes after that, they walked out with a lady that was just staring at me. She was in cuffs. She was wearing my dress and she had my clothes on and my jewelry. It scared me to think that someone came into my room, took my stuff while I was probably asleep. I'm now 16 and I live in a town very far away from there, but I still wonder what would have happened to me if I never called my dad, or if I never woke up that day she was staring at me.
Number 4.
My name is Shane, and here's a bit of background. I'm from a small town called Wigston in the city of Leicestershire, England, and my town is a small community, and I know pretty much everyone in my town. This will be relevant later on in the story, but now on to the main story. I was in my home alone, as my mum and dad were out on their honeymoon in Manchester. My parents are huge Manchester United fans, and they wanted to see the Manchester United Stadium. They also found a nice cabin to get away for a little bit. Now, I was 17 at the time, so it wasn't a big deal to me because I'd been home alone loads of times before. Plus, they only just recently got married, so I didn't mind being home alone because everyone's entitled to a break as soon as they get married. All was well, as I was listening to my music on my MacBook and playing along to songs on my guitar in my bedroom upstairs. It's next to my dad and mum's room, and we have a bathroom opposite my room. So, as soon as you come up the stairs, my room is the first thing you see. The next thing I know, I hear a car pull up on my driveway. Now, our driveway is rather small, and if you were to stand in the living room, you can see outside the front of the house as we have a large four-sided bay window. So I went downstairs and peeked out of the window, just out of sight. I was hiding behind the brown curtains we have, and there was this old-looking man who seemed to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and he was driving a Ford Fiesta, but I thought nothing of it as I was expecting a parcel delivery that day anyway. And sometimes in our town, we have some private deliveries, so it all seems pretty normal. When he got out of his car and started walking towards our door, I noticed there was no parcel inside. So I found this a little bit weird. My doorbell rang and I went to the door and slowly opened it, and I said,
Yes?
He said,
Hi, I'm a friend of your dad's. He asked me to check up on you while he was away at work. My name's Jim.
At the time, I knew my dad was away on his honeymoon with my mum, so red flags went off. I said,
Oh, well, I'm fine, thank you. Bye. Aren't you going to invite me in?
He said. He said this in a disturbing tone, so I said,
No, I have a lot of things to do and I'm very busy. I have to go to the shops and get some things.
He huffed and said,
Okay, fine. Maybe next time.
And he walked back into his car and sped off. As soon as he left, I rang my dad and told him about the situation, and my dad said that he never heard of anyone called Jim in our town before, and he thought it was funny because he thought that the man must have had the wrong address or something. But I honestly felt sick because I nearly believed him. That is, until he said that my dad was at work. I remember having shivers run down my spine at the time, but I shrugged it off after this as I just told myself that he had the wrong house. So I went back upstairs and put my music on to try and forget about what had just happened, but I sure was shaken up for the rest of the day. As soon as it hit 11 PM, I was fine. In fact, I'd almost forgotten about the creepy guy from earlier, so I tried to get some sleep. I was awoken by smashing glass. I panicked and I looked out of my bedroom window, but I could barely see anything. It was pitch black outside. But in the corner of my eye, I could see car lights with the full beam on. And finally, after what felt like minutes, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and
Let me ask you a question. Do you think computer-generated visual effects are ruining movies these days? Do your eyes glaze at the glut of glossy CGI-stuffed summer blockbusters? Do your fingers rage across subreddits and message boards about a simpler, better time, back before computers ruined movies? If only we could return to the cinema
What I saw made me have a feeling of dread wash over me, and the hairs on my whole body stood upright. It was the same green Ford Fiesta from earlier, and this creep, he was inside my house. I could hear footsteps coming from downstairs, so I called the police and grabbed my multi-pocket knife tool. It was the one I was using to restring my guitar. I waited and waited until I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, and he started pushing my door open. As soon as his foot was in the door, I ran and pushed all of my body weight on the door and crushed his foot. He let out a heart-wrenching scream, so I knew he was in pain. As soon as I opened the door, I saw him on the floor, so I kicked him in the face and booked it out of there, and I waited in a big bush on the other side of the road of my house. Finally, to my relief, the police showed up and entered the house. They must have been in there for around 10 minutes, but they finally arrested that punk. He was hiding in my wardrobe with a bread knife he took from my kitchen, and they also found some rope and some duct tape. The police told me that there had been many reports on this guy, telling young teens that he's a friend of the family, and then he would try and kidnap them for ransom. He had been wanted for a while for similar crimes, and I'm not sure what came of him, but the police also told me that I was very lucky and that I did the right thing. They called my mum and dad, and they were on their way back as soon as they heard. After this incident, I now keep my pocket knife next to my bed when I sleep.
Number 3.
I lost my wife 2 years ago, and my son's twin. It happened in a car accident in which a drunk driver ran them off the road and they hit a tree while returning home from the store. My son was 6 at the time, and I lived in a big house on 4 acres because my wife and I planned on having a big family. The layout of the house is as follows. My room entrance was next to my son's room entrance, and all you needed to do is make a quick left after you exit my son's room and you would be in my room. Next to my room is another bedroom we use as a playroom for my son and his friends. Across from that room is the kitchen, and then straight down from my son's room is the living room and the front door. Beside our house, there's a cottage that my little sister rented for me that was down the driveway of my own property. Across the street lived an elderly couple whose house faced the cottage, and you could see in the front room of the cottage from there. Jake, my older neighbour, he was a retired drug cop for the county, and he was responsible for German Shepherd breeding, and he had dogs that were a part of a K9 unit around the county. They had 2 pups left out of the one litter, and when my wife and son were alive, they gave each of my boys a female puppy to raise as their own. The boys would go over to the old couple's house when I fixed the easy jobs for them, and they'd invited us over to dinner for helping them out. Sometimes my sons would sleep over at Jake's house when I or my wife couldn't be home to watch them. My sons would sleep over at the old couple's house because they acted like grandparents to them. Lucky my son could bring his dogs over too. Anyway, my sister got married to a guy who had 3 teenage sons and a daughter 6 months after my wife and son died. Since the cottage only had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and 1 kitchen and a family room, my sister asked me if they could rent out the big house. No one in my family was happy that my sister married her boyfriend. The guy was creepy, and one of his sons, Kyle, would harass my boy every time the family got together. When Kyle got near my boy, both dogs, Ash and Tara, would go crazy and growl when Kyle or anyone from his family came near. Ash and Tara didn't like my sister either, and it was a bit strange. One day, my son was playing out with his friends, and Kyle stated that he would kill Ash and Tara. I just turned the corner and told Kyle,
If you hurt my son or his dogs, I'll make sure you will not have your next birthday.
Kyle had the holy shit look on his face. Kyle ran and told my sister what I just told him. My sister called me and started yelling at me. I just told her basically if my son or dogs get hurt or die, she'll be taking it to the sheriff. Kyle was a troublemaker in our town, and if something was stolen or broken in, the sheriff would visit him as the prime suspect. The sheriff knew where Kyle lived, and the sheriff was actually my best friend growing up. One day, my son was playing outside the cottage while I was doing yard work. Kyle pulled up in his car and started yelling at my son that he was going to beat him up and going to slit his throat. Every time Kyle did this to my son, he would cry and yell for me. One night at Jake's house, the older gentleman, I was telling him and his wife just to be careful because Kyle was unstable and so was the rest of the family. A few months later, someone broke into their house and they met Jake's German Shepherd, who didn't like anyone but the couple and my son. Before Jake's 2 dogs could get a bite of the intruder, the intruder ran out of the house and shut the door. Unknown to the intruder, Jake had a silent alarm system that went off. And, well, naturally, the sheriff came across to the road to ask Kyle some questions, like where he was and so forth. Well, the police didn't catch the intruder, but my neighbors and I knew it was Kyle. After that incident, Jake told me of a buddy of his who worked on training canine dogs for the police and the feds. Jake's friend could teach both of my boys German Shepherds to protect him, and to train both dogs to be therapy dogs so they both would be around my boy all the time. I told him I was interested, and told Jake, no matter what the cost, I'd do it. So, I explained to my little boy that Tara and Ash would be going to doggy school over the summer, and he would go with them so the dog trainer could train them to protect him and myself. So when school let out for the summer, my son, Ash, and Tara went to the training on the weekends, and I would go too. I would take my dogs, my son, Jake and his wife, my neighbors, so I could go to work. Then pick them all up after a day. Kyle surprisingly stopped by one day during the summer and asked me where my boy went during the day. I told him to piss off and get a life and get out of my sight and leave my son the fuck alone. This angered Kyle, and he told me that he would make sure I would pay for disrespecting him. He had that killer look in his eyes. I called my friend, the sheriff, and reported to him what Kyle told me. The sheriff came and talked to Kyle, and I came over to the cottage after. The sheriff told me that there was nothing he could do at the moment, but that I should think about arming myself. I told my friend I already carried a gun, and there's a gun in the house. After the sheriff left, my sister's husband came down and started to pound at my door, yelling and cussing at me for calling the cops on his son. I just told him to stay away from my home and my son. I also warned him that I had no problem protecting my son. This seemed to infuriate him even more, but he left when he saw Jake's son standing on Jake's porch just staring at us. Jake's son was also in the law enforcement, and I knew him because he thanked me for helping out his parents all the time. Jake's son also told me that his father kept him up on all of the drama that was happening at my house. My sister called me a few hours after the incident and told me that she decided to take her family and husband off for a vacation for a week or so to allow everyone to cool down. This truly was a blessing, and there was some peace and quiet for a few weeks. After a long summer of going to work and training with the dogs, my sister and her family came home. When I saw Kyle, he had this sinister look on his face, and I got a bad feeling, and was actually a bit scared. My son was a new person after the confidence with training the dogs and hanging out with Jake and his wife. It was the Saturday after Halloween that I had the scare of my life. I took my son and his bag full of candy to his room and laid him onto his bed to go to sleep for the night. Both dogs slept in the same room with my son near the entrance of the room. My son slept far away from the window that faces the main road and Jake's house. After putting my son to bed, I went to the kitchen to grab some soda and chips. I then went to the living room where the TV was. I was watching the news at around 10 PM, and I must have dozed off. I was then suddenly awoken by glass being broken and my son's two dogs going absolutely crazy. The dogs were barking, and some guy was yelling to get them off of him. I grabbed the shotgun I had in a safe in the closet in the hallway. By the time I found the dogs, they were barking and biting someone in my bedroom in the dark. When the person stood up, I shot them with my shotgun twice, and the dogs ran out of the room. My first instinct was to look to see if my son was safe. I went to his room, and he was in the closet crying, with the two dogs sitting out in front of the closet barking. I heard the front door open, and I turned around and pointed my gun, and I saw that it was Jake, and he had his shotgun. I told Jake to take my son over to his house, and I would go over into the playroom to see if there was anyone in it. Jake took my son, and the dogs followed. I heard police sirens in the distance now. I was later told that Jake's wife is the one who called the cops after hearing the shotgun shots at my house. The police pulled up, and they came barreling through my front door with their guns drawn. I was told to put my gun on the floor and walk backwards with my hands in the air. I was detained in the police car until the sheriff came up to me, opened the door, and he told me that it was Kyle laying on the floor with a kitchen knife in his hand, and he looked dead. When my sister's husband heard this, he went crazy, and he began threatening to kill me and to do the same thing that I had done to his son. Well, the cops arrested him for threatening to kill me as well. I was taken down to the sheriff's department and questioned. After the sheriff and district attorney looked over the case, they did not file murder charges on me because of the threat Kyle made to my son, and Kyle broke into my home with the intent to kill me and my son. My sister, she was furious, and the day that she was told that no charges were going to be filed against me, she took her family up and left everything at my home she was renting. Unfortunately, she divorced her husband and then killed herself. I haven't heard from the husband, but from what the sheriff told me, he's serving a life sentence for killing his third wife. I still live in the same house with my son, and I still go visit Jake and his wife daily to make sure they're okay. I also thank them for being such good neighbors to me and my son.
Number 2.
This happened a few years ago. It was the 4th of July weekend, and my parents were actually going away. They had pets, so they asked me if I could stay at the house and watch them and feed them. I didn't mind and brought along my PlayStation to keep me busy. Now, they have a garage and it's detached from the house. There's one car in it and my father's tools. He has everything. This man could sell Craftsman half the company back if he wanted to. Anyway, it was the first night they were gone, and I was drinking and playing games until about 3 AM. At this point, the bag they kept for cans was pretty full, mainly from me drinking beers. I pull the bag up and proceed out the back door, through the little back porch and to the recycling bins. As I'm doing this, I notice the side door to the garage is cracked open. Thinking mainly that my father had possibly left the garage door open, I go to close it. I'm walking towards the door, and it suddenly just shuts on me. I stand there frozen in fear and try to start thinking rational thoughts. Now, there's a window on the side of the garage about 3 feet from the door. I go to the window and cup my hands, trying to see if there's anything in there. I'm standing there for about a good minute looking into the darkness. I keep thinking I can see little bits of movement, but I wasn't sure if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I'm just about to say it was the wind, when suddenly, this hideous white face turns and looks at me. That whole time, I hadn't been looking into the darkness. I was actually looking at the black hair on the side of someone's head. Someone who was watching the door. Here I am, eye to eye with this face for what seems like forever. I'm almost paralyzed. I fall back and then scramble to my feet. I run up the little stairs, through the screened-in porch and into the house. I lock the door behind me and I turn the light off in the kitchen and look through the window. I see the light in the garage going on and off through all the windows. I start running through the house, turning every light I come across off. If there was somebody out there, I didn't want them to know where in the house I was. I begin making my way to the front room when I hear a loud bang from the back door. Suddenly, I hear glass breaking, and what I can only describe as what sounded like a high-pitched dog whining. Almost shitting bricks, I turn and run towards the dining room where my phone had been charging. Doing so, I was in direct sight of the back door. I grabbed my phone and turned, and I'll never forget this image. As I turned, I saw the same face I saw in the window, only connected to a head that was smashed through the window of the door. Blood was pooling on the floor, and it was dripping down the door. His head and his arm were in the house. He was moving and flailing frantically. I saw one hand up against the top part of the door holding the frame. I also noticed it was partially gripping a hatchet. I nearly passed out from fear. At this point, I yelled something. I don't remember what was said, but it was enough that the person noticed me in the darkness and started pulling himself through the broken glass. I got my legs working again and ran to the front room and started pulling the door open. This is when I started hearing that loud shrieking again. I managed to lock the bottom lock on the handle as I got myself outside. Once I got out, I dialed 911 and screamed for the police. I hid around the corner of my car in the driveway and listened. All I could hear was whining and screaming while the insane person just smashed things in the house. About 5 minutes after I called, the police showed up. Right when they saw me, they came over and asked what was going on. I told them, and they looked to the house and called for backup. Right as we all looked, we noticed the man at the front door. He was standing in the glass door with the main inside door open. He was wearing a white shirt with what looked like bicycle shorts and no shoes on. He was still holding the hatchet and he was bleeding everywhere. The cops pulled their guns out, but the man closed the door and went back into the house. At this point, the cops noped the fuck out of there and decided that calling a SWAT team was a better idea. They raided the place, and when they did, they found the man naked, hiding under my parents' bed. He had smashed pretty much everything in the house, and there legitimately was blood on everything. He had cut his arm and stomach wide open with the glass in the back door. He took an ambulance ride to the hospital, of course, after he was tased. Apparently, he was a mentally unstable individual, and he was living in the garage the whole time. I don't know how long he'd been in there for, or even how he got in there, but it was my father's hatchet he was using. It was found buried in the wall of the living room.
Number 1.
This just happened a few weeks ago. I work for a security company as a patrol officer in Oregon. It's a kind of semi-police operation. We patrol client properties and respond to alarms as well as non-emergency calls. While on a routine patrol at about 4 in the morning, I received an alarm call about 16 miles from my location, out in a very rural area. It was just a garage door hit, no motion sensors or other alarms, which is usually an indication of a false alarm or an animal hitting the door or something. I'd just been called out to that location a few days prior to the same thing and knew that no one was currently living there. So I notified the other officer on duty and headed out to what I expected would be an uneventful call. Now, for those of you who don't know, winter in my part of Oregon is very foggy and wet. At 4 o'clock in the morning, there's a heavy overcast allowing no moonlight in. You can't even see the city lamps from the interstate off-ramp at this time. I cruised onto the interstate, going a whopping 55 miles per hour through the thick blinding fog, and arrived to the exit I needed to take after a few minutes. I carefully drove through the back roads to the long, pothole-filled gravel road that was the private drive to the residence where the alarm was located. I slowly crept up the steep drive, slipping in and out of the water-filled holes, which were unavoidable, having less than 10 feet of vision through the thick fog. Large evergreen trees and tall thick grass lined the narrow single-car road. There was no way for me to safely turn around until I reached an actual driveway. The now mostly dirt road split into a Y shape with a large sign in the fork that had an arrow pointing both ways, with corresponding addresses and family names. I turned onto the fork that I had previously driven a few days ago. I knew the road got pretty sketchy for a rear-wheel drive car at this point. The driveway looked as if it hadn't been maintained in years. It was dirt, and now mud from last night's rain, making it both slippery and steep. I had to give the patrol car some gas to get enough momentum up the driveway without getting stuck. A few seconds of slipping, sliding, and a lot of jostling, I arrived at the house. It was a newer, mobile home, probably early 2000s, with an addition that housed a real fireplace, and the owner had built a detached 2-car garage, as well as a covered walkway to it. The driveway led me to an empty piece of concrete slab, matching the house foundation, where 6 cars could have easily parked. The property was about 5 acres backed up to the BLM land, meaning government-owned land, which translates to, the house had a shit ton of forest behind it. As I pulled up onto the concrete slab, I noticed a weak light in the woods behind the house. Immediately, I clicked on the spotlight and shined it in that direction. I couldn't make anything out through the fog, but I was sure I saw something. I didn't hear an audible alarm, so I rationalized that it may have been a reflector on a tree or my eyes just playing tricks on me. I parked the patrol car and turned on my alley lights to give me a little more insight to my surroundings. I drew my weapon and exited the car, feeling a bit on edge. I radioed to my partner that I was on the scene and received a broken but readable acknowledgement. I approached the covered walkway separating the garage from the house with my flashlight and weapon at the low ready. My heart stopped as I peeked around the corner to see muddy boot prints leading to the garage door that was open. Light was streaming out from what should have been an unoccupied garage, illuminating tools and garbage strewn across the walkway and the boot prints which led to the back of the house. I saw splinters of wood jutting from the garage door jamb, telling me the door was forced open. A quick glance to the house and I saw large gashes in the siding, as if someone was trying to hack their way in with an axe or something. I pointed my weapon in the direction of the door and backed up to my patrol vehicle. Rain had turned from a light sprinkle to heavy falling globs now. I took cover by my vehicle and radioed my partner.
2-3 from 2-0.
Code 423.
He replied, very scratchily.
I've got an active code 48. The door is kicked in.
I called to him hurriedly.
20, you were broken. Repeat your last.
I heard him call back.
Damn it.
I cursed and hopped into the driver's seat to use my car radio.
2-3. Entry has been made into this home.
Copy 20. What's your 20?
I relayed the address and my location to my partner, and he acknowledged. I hopped back out of the seat and retreated to my cover position. My ears strained to hear any noise, other than the hum of my engine and the downpour of rain. My eyes felt wild as they darted around the darkness trying to catch any signs of danger within. I shuddered with adrenaline, cold, and fear, feeling completely exposed in the darkness with backup miles away. An explosion ruptured through the white noise, and I dropped to a knee, ducking behind my four-wheeled cover. My meter now reaching maximum, I peeked over the trunk and quickly scanned the area for a threat, seeing nothing. I half-crouched with my weapon raised and sidestepped to my open driver door. I scanned quickly one more time and jumped into the seat. I put my weapon in my left hand, threw the car into drive, and floored it down the muddy driveway. I slid and sideswiped a wooden post lining the driveway, knocking it over, but continued unflinchingly. I floored it past the fork until I reached the thick gravel part of the road, about halfway from the driveway to the cross street. I slammed on the brakes, skidded to a stop, and then began an 8-point turn, slamming into a couple of unsuspecting saplings and denting my rear bumper. I faced my vehicle towards the house and presumed danger. I left the vehicle and drive, my gun in my left hand, and pulled out my phone with the right to call the on-call sergeant. I called, and my sergeant answered after a few rings.
What's up?
A tired voice asked.
I'm at... Entry has been made, and possible shots fired. I've not made a visual contact with the suspect. I retreated to a safer location. Officer 2-3 is en route. Text me the address. I'm on the way.
He answered, and then hung up. I fumbled with one hand to open up the messaging app on my phone, the bright screen blinding me. As I typed out the address, the piercing scream of the home's audible alarm rang out through the night. I sent the text message to my sergeant, then radioed my partner.
2-3 from 2-0.
No answer.
2-3, 2-0.
I repeated, slower.
20, I can barely read you. You're coming in broken. ETA 7 miles.
Copy 2-3. Be advised. I have possible shots fired. No visual, and I'm now about 100 yards up the driveway from the turnoff.
20, confirm. Shots fired?
Affirmative. No visual on suspect.
Copy.
I sat, weapon in hand, foot just above the gas pedal, waiting to plough the nose of my patrol car through the fence of whatever danger showed itself. Paranoia grew for what felt like an eternity, until the flashing amber and white lights of my partner's patrol car appeared in my rearview mirror. I floored the gas pedal and roared the now beaten Crown Vic up the private drive once more, and I turned my amber light bar on.
2-3. We're going to take the right fork. The driveway is shit. Stay to the left and gun it, or you'll get stuck. Stay on my ass.
Copy.
Our Crown Vics roared up the driveway, and the home came into view again. I pulled my car into a half-turn and park, my partner mimicking. Before I realized it, I was out of the car and marching forward into the ready position, my weapon and light leading. The alarm deafened us as we approached, sharp daggers of pain stabbing into our unprotected ears. My partner on my heels, we approached the scene I had left. I scanned around the corner of the garage again to find a flurry of new boot prints and some of the tools now gone. We pushed forward, taking the right wall of the garage, my partner taking the left wall belonging to the house. His wall stopped short of the garage door, so he took aim at the door while I picked around his wall. I nodded to him, and he quickly scanned around the corner while I covered him. He then fell in behind me as I advanced to the door. He placed his hand on my back, and we burst into the garage, flanking along the walls. But we found it empty. We quickly turned back to the main home, checking doors and windows along the back porch as we went. They were all locked, and through one of the uncovered windows, I could see that the home appeared empty. We circled around the home, finding no signs of entry into it. We rallied back to our patrol cars as the sergeant pulled on the scene in his personal vehicle. I yelled to the sergeant through the still blaring alarm that we still hadn't had any eyes on the suspect. He nodded in acknowledgement and motioned for the three of us to go to the front door. We did this, and while my partner watched the door, the sergeant and I cleared the home and disarmed the alarm. As we thought, no entry had been made. Our ears, now relieved of the sirens, rang instead with the sudden silence. We rallied into the entryway of the home, and I informed the sergeant of our findings thus far. It was a little after 5 o'clock now. The fog had lifted considerably, and the rain had stopped entirely. We walked back to the garage to show the sergeant.
Well, shit,
He said, looking at the garage door.
Looks like he took a pry bar to this. Doesn't look like the deadbolt was engaged.
He photographed the damage with his phone. I turned his attention to the exterior wall of the home and the gashes in it.
Well, that's a first for me. Why didn't he just go through the door?
He inspected the damage closer and said it looked like it had been made with an axe. My partner and I nodded in agreement.
Where did you hear the shots from?
He asked me. I pointed out into the woods behind the house.
I can't be entirely sure, but I think he came from out there. I thought I saw, like, a low-power flashlight out there when I arrived, but I couldn't make it out through the fog, and it disappeared as soon as I noticed it. Well, you want to check it out?
The sergeant asked, pointing to the trail of single pair of boots leading away from the property.
Not really,
I muttered as the three of us marched into the darkness. We flicked our flashlights on and off and moved in a slow and steady scan-advance-scan movement, about 10 feet beside one another, trying to follow the trail while not being an obvious target for the lone gunman in the woods. We lost the trail when it reached soft grass complemented with fallen leaves, and we turned back. The sergeant sent my partner back on patrol while we secured the garage, notifying the property owner and informed the alarm company. It was a bit after 6:30 when we finished photographing everything and speaking with the property owner about every detail of the incident. Dawn was now providing enough light not to require flashlights anymore, and the fog was now very faint. We decided to go investigate the backyard again, in the light. What my sergeant found though, simply as it was, made me feel sick to my stomach. The trail, it had split, and the path we missed before led to where I had seen the light. Along that path, we found what appeared to be imprints in the mud of someone laying down, and beside it laid a single 30-06 casing. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and be sure to be safe during the Christmas season when the break-ins are high, you filthy animals. I really hope you guys get that pun, otherwise I'm going to sound like a complete jerk. Anyway, thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you're all doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent, just so that I can be above board with everything. Please also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So guys, as we approach the Christmas break, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the channel this year. It's December now and we're getting really close to the end of the year, and it's just been an amazing 6 months. I'm really excited for the next year too. I really feel like the channel is now in full swing, and I'm looking forward to some more creepy countdowns and scary stories to make all of our nights more enjoyable in 2016. You guys have been so incredibly supportive this year, and I've really appreciated all of the kind words and constructive criticism you guys have been offering. I feel like because of all of you guys, I'm a much more confident and better content creator, and that the content I'm now creating is really top notch. So thank you guys so much for all of your support. Also guys, this Christmas, I want to try and bring out a mega video with all of the best stories of 2015 thanks to all of the positive feedback from the email partner Taylor. We received a domestic disturbance call, and the dispatcher said that there were probably some kids messing around our town's abandoned hospital, and someone called because they saw lights coming from the hospital. So, my partner and I were arriving to the location when we saw some lights in some of the rooms and some shadows in the rooms. We enter the hospital, and we find that there's graffiti everywhere and broken glass all over the ground. When we get inside, we call out to anyone.
Police, please, come out.
We hear no response though, and the place is very unnervingly quiet. We start our search and find that some people must have lived there at some point but vacated a long time ago. We continue our search up to the second floor, and that's where it got weird. We smelt some sort of horrible smell at this point, and we were very on edge about the whole thing. We start our search on the second floor and find broken beer bottles and cans. We're almost done when we hear a kid start to cry, and we call out again,
It's the police. Please, come out.
Again, no answer. But now, my partner and I know someone is here. So, we start to search where we thought the cry came from, and we enter some of the rooms and find that they're empty. We enter another room and see that there's someone behind a blue kind of see-through curtain thing. I call out.
I see you. Come out of the curtain.
I move closer and pull back the curtain, and there's no one there. And the shadow behind the curtain, it just dissipated, like there was no one there. I blew it off and said that it must have just been the way the light was hitting the curtain or something. I continue my search, and after sweeping the whole hospital twice, my partner and I head out, and on the stairs we can see directly to the end of the hall where the main door is, and I see someone standing in front of the main door. I tell him,
Police, put your hands up and get on your knees.
The man doesn't seem to care. I can't see what he looks like, all I see is a shadow. I turn on my flashlight and he runs off into the room on the right. I run after him and tell him to
Stop running! Stop, now!
He doesn't comply, and I follow him through the room. He runs to the back of the hospital and out a back door into some woods. I chase him for some time in the woods with my partner, and I ended up losing him. I called dispatch, and they sent 3 others. They help us look for about 45 minutes, sweeping the path we went looking for him, and we came up with nothing. We go back to the hospital, and it's not long before we find what the smell is. It's coming from one of the maintenance closets. We find a dead cat with burned out candles all around it. It looked like a satanic ritual or something. It was pretty bad. My partner saw it and she had to head outside. She just couldn't stomach it. The cat, it looked like it was cut open in a surgical fashion, and its blood was everywhere, including in the shape of a pentagram with some sort of non-human skull in the middle. It was a bloody mess, and I hope to never see something like that again. As for the guy, he was never caught, and I never found the crying kid I heard when I was on the second floor. But since that night, I have had some things happen to me in my house. Other than the nightmares that are very vivid, other things that I can't explain have happened. I've heard kids in my house crying. I've heard knocks at night on my walls, and the occasional shadow in my hallway and room at night. Taylor hasn't had anything like this happen, but she has nightmares like mine and has had one encounter with a shadow figure in her basement steps, but she's never seen anything else. Unfortunately, I have more stories, but this will have to do for now.
Number 3.
So, my partner and I, Beth, we went to investigate a home that a girl had called from but hung up after stating her name and address. It was just the 2 of us, and we were prepared for what sounded like maybe someone had broken into our house and she had to stay quiet or something like that. We arrived in a not so good part of town at a large 2-story greenhouse that looked like it had been built in the 1960s. It had a really creepy atmosphere about it, and it kind of sent chills down my spine. Myself and Beth approached the front door and peered inside, and from where the door was angled, we couldn't see anybody. We knocked on the front door a few times, and an elderly woman came up and unlocked the door. She asked us what we needed, and we told her about the girl who had called from this home. She looked at us all confused and said that no one lived here but herself. We looked at each other and nodded. Just to be safe, we asked to have a chance to look around the house in case she was lying. She just sighed and motioned us inside. We entered the house and looked around. After some time looking, I got a call from the police station, and they reported that the girl had called once again, and this time she said that she was hiding. I shuddered at the message and went back inside and told Beth about the call. We then proceeded to move upstairs, and I was met with a giggling of a girl, I think. I asked her if there was anyone up there, and I was given a reply rather quickly. From my left, there was a closed door, and I heard a girl say,
I'm in here.
I got serious chills and started wondering if this was some kind of messed up prank, to which I was very displeased with and would have to arrest the woman for. I pushed open the door and there was no one in there. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind a bookshelf, but nothing. I was really freaked out by this, but I decided it had been some kind of prank, and I stormed downstairs, and as I made my way downstairs, I got another notice from the police station. Again, the girl had called in, but this time she told the police that she wasn't there anymore. Now I just wanted to get out of there. I told the woman what I had experienced upstairs, and she just laughed. I looked at her, confused, and then she proceeded with,
"Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been Emily. She's such a silly thing, always making prank calls. She's such a humorous girl."
Frustrated now, I asked her why she told us that she lived alone then. She smiled wider.
"Well, I do live alone. It's just me in this house."
I looked at Beth, and she just stared at me, bewildered. I thanked the woman and exited the house with Beth. We didn't talk on the way back, and we haven't talked about the job since. It was really weird, and it still gives me chills just thinking about it. I don't know if I was going crazy or if the lady was, and I don't know if it was just some sort of stupid prank they did really well. All I know is that I probably never will know what happened at that house.
Number 2.
A few years back, my partner and I, Deborah, got a call to investigate an abandoned building that someone said they saw a person walking around in through the windows. Since it was seemingly falling apart, it would be wise to make the person exit for safety reasons. Now, I'm not usually scared easily because of past calls where I had to risk my life to catch criminals, but I'll be honest and say that my first glimpse at the building, it gave me chills and made my gut hurt. I just shook the feeling away though, and myself and Deborah proceeded to walk in and start searching the place for the person that was seen. The building was about 4 stories high, so we had to make sure to check every level. While searching the first floor, when Deborah was searching the second, I started to hear footsteps coming up from behind me. At first, I assumed it was Deborah, but then it occurred to me that I hadn't heard her come down the steps, so I turned around expecting to see the person we were looking for, but there was no one. I shined my flashlight around, but there was no one in sight. I got really creeped out, but I ignored it and continued searching. I entered one of the rooms that wasn't that big, and seeing no one there, I turned around to go back out. But as soon as I pointed my lights toward the door, I saw somebody walk by the door. This startled me, and I froze in fear, but ran to see who had walked past the door. Again though, there was no one there. At this point, I was getting scared, and I decided to go upstairs to catch up with Deborah. When I reached the top of the stairs, I caught a glimpse of Deborah shining her light around a room. I ran over to her and told her what happened. She seemed to get mad at me and asked me why I hadn't caught him or her, and right when I was about to answer, we both heard footsteps on the 3rd floor above us. Deborah sighed and carefully walked up the stairs to confront the person. I slowly followed her, and midway on the stairs, after she had turned a corner, a figure stepped in front of the top of the stairs and just stared at me. This made me freeze in fear, and I couldn't bring myself to shine my flashlight on them. He stared at me for what seemed like hours, then giggled, and then walked to where Deborah had went. At that moment, I ran up the stairs and went in the same direction, and after a few minutes of running around, I finally found Deborah. I asked her if she knew someone was following her, and she looked at me, confused. I told her what I saw, and I could tell that this made her nervous. She looked around nervously and made a fake laugh. She said,
"Okay, I feel like we're a part of a dumb prank here or something."
I nodded, and we decided to proceed back down to the 1st floor and to try to think of what to do next. We were down in one room for about 20 to 30 minutes before we heard footsteps in the other room. On instinct, I put my hand on my taser just in case this person wanted to hurt us, and the footsteps stopped. After waiting another 10 minutes, nothing happened. Deborah and I ran out the front door. We took a minute to calm ourselves down, and we went to the houses down the street and looked for the person who called us. We found him, and we asked him if he was sure he knew what he saw. He broke down and told us that he and his friend Ethan wanted to play a prank on us and that he had lied about seeing someone up there. When he told us that, I could feel my face go white. I looked over at Deborah, and she looked white too. That night, we had to arrest a boy, and I never went near that building again. I don't know if there was actually someone in there with us, or if I had just witnessed something completely paranormal.
Number 1.
For 5 years, I was the only 911 dispatcher in a region of remote Alaska, which was roughly the size of the state of Oregon. I was employed by the biggest town on the Delta, called a city by its 6,000 residents, but our dispatch office was also responsible for answering any emergency calls in the area once the Alaska State Trooper post in town closed for the night. As unusual as a 911 office is under normal conditions, 911 in Bush, Alaska beats it all. However, the incident I'm about to share was not sparked by one of these calls, but by a strange visitor. The dispatch office in which I worked was directly behind the public lobby at the police station. We had a large bulletproof window in the wall, through which we would communicate with the members of the public who came in for assistance, to pay fines or request reports, etc. This particular night was a deadly slow blizzardy shift, with sideways blowing snow, wind chills down to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and literally nothing happening. As was usual, I was on shift with 2 officers, and the 3 of us basically dedicated the night to getting caught up on paperwork. By 1 AM, I had finished all the routine tasks that I could think of, and was just settling down to a rousing remainder of the shift completing crossword puzzles, playing Spider Solitaire, and being ready to answer a phone that had not rung for hours. Fortunately, we had a chief of police that only required us to be on station and awake. Once our paperwork was done, we were free to do whatever we needed to do in order to occupy us until the next call came in. We could not leave 911 unattended, and the officers were always willing to sit in while we hurried across the hall to the bathroom or outside for a few moments. I buzzed down to the squad room and asked if someone could come up and cover for me. Sergeant A agreed happily, and I soon heard her footsteps coming up the long connecting hallway. She popped her head in the back door, and I went out the front, opened the door to the lobby, and grabbed my coat and went outside. It was bitter, but invigorating, and I lit a cigarette, prepared to shiver it out. We always left the connecting doors open, so I could run back and take over any incoming calls. The station was built on stilts to keep it off from the permafrost, so the front door was either reached by a flight of 10 metal steps to the right of the door, or a disabled access ramp to the left. There was a landing connecting the ramp and the steps, and the main front door opened off of this. I had gone down the ramp a little way to get out from under the roof and to try and get a better look at the sky. Suddenly, I heard Sergeant A give a little gasp and call my name. I went back up the ramp to the door and called in, not wanting to crush my butt unless I needed to. She came to the lobby door, asking if I'd been standing on the landing just now. I told her no, I was down the ramp. She told me that she had glanced up to the monitor that showed the view from the front door security camera, and that there was someone standing at the door, peering into the lobby. This person was shorter than I, which is unusual since I'm only 5'2". The person was much thinner and wearing a jacket with a hood up over their head. I don't own any coats like this.
It wasn't me, and there's no one out there except me,
I assured her. We both shook our heads. I finished my smoke and we went back into the office. She was showing me where she had been standing when she looked at the monitor and pointed up at it.
There, just like that.
I looked up and, sure enough, there it was. A short, thin figure in a hoodie, staring into the lobby from outside of the front door. Sergeant A ran out of the office, threw open the lobby door and ran across to the front door. On the security camera, I could see the figure until the moment Sergeant A's back intervened. Of course, there was no one on the landing when she opened the outer door. She stepped out, looked all around, bent over to inspect the snow by the door, then came back inside, puzzled. I watched the monitor closely, but nothing appeared at the front door. Sergeant A closed the door to the lobby, returned to the dispatch office, and the two of us just stood staring at the monitor for a long time. And nothing.
Did you hear any cars?
I asked.
No,
she said, trailing off as she seemed to catch my meaning.
Hang on.
She bolted down the long hall to the squad room, then out the squad door to her unit. She radioed in as though it was just the beginning of a patrol round, and I responded likewise. She drove up and down the street in front of the station, around the station, on the back streets near the station, through the parking lots for at least 5 blocks in every direction, and never made a flicker on the monitor. No vehicle lights could have caused that figure to appear just there. She finished her patrol and came back to the station. She left her unit parked outside the front door, where it formed a better backdrop for the security camera. Not 5 minutes after she stamped in, the figure, it was back, staring into the lobby yet again. I hollered for her, and both officers came running up the hallway. The other officer ran into dispatch, where he could see the figure for a few seconds before Sergeant A's back obliterated the sight. But again, no one was there, and no footprints in the snow. But 3 of us, 2 cops and a dispatch supervisor, had definitely seen this thing. None of us spook easily. I mean, we couldn't do these jobs for very long if we did, but we were spooked that night. Officer C soon went back to his desk, but Sergeant A and I took turns staring at the monitor and opening and closing doors, windows, turning lights and computer screens, anything that might resembly explain what 3 sober adults had clearly seen. But nothing made the figure appear again. Finally exhausting all possible experiments, we shrugged and each went back to our desks. I kept glancing at the monitor, but no hooded figure, not for an hour or so. I took one call from someone who complained they had paid a bootlegger $70 for a bottle of whiskey and never got the bottle. This was a standard call, and it happened 7 or 8 times a month. The town I was in was known as moist, meaning adults could airship in 15 pints of hard liquor a month, but selling liquor in town was against the law. Of course, this worked as well as prohibition ever did, meaning not at all. I patiently explained that buying booze in town was a crime and that police could not help citizens commit a crime. The caller was not willing to press charges. I mean, they never were, and I learned not to bother asking. As I was going through this, I glanced up at the monitor, and I saw the figure again. This time, it was leaning toward the door with hands seemingly cupped to either side of its face, the way you do to reduce the glare in a bright window. I told the caller that I would not be sending a cop and hung up on the furious cursing this answer always triggered, and I hollered for Sergeant A. I heard the footsteps coming up the hallway again, but this time, slowly. I heard them, and then nothing. I moved back to where I could look down the hallway. It was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to go in that hallway, unless they went out of the squad door, and that hadn't happened. Then, Sergeant A appeared at the far end, in the squad room, and called out to me.
Hey C, B said you hollered. It was back, but it's gone again.
She came up the hallway, and I realized that the first footsteps, the ones that stopped, were too light and shuffled too much to be the sergeant's. I told her about those footsteps, and she caught and held my gaze for a long minute. This really unnerved me. Cops looking that way can do that, even when you work right beside them.
Have you heard these before?
There was a note in her voice that made me realize that something serious was happening here.
I have, but always on windy, blowy nights. I just figured that something in this old rotten building was banging around and getting ready to fall off or something. Of course, that wasn't what my trainer had told me.
The sergeant, who had been hired after my trainer left, had not heard the story, so I filled her in.
Apparently, the holding cells in the first police station, the older part, were back where the squad room is now. Once they built the jail, they pulled out the cells and made it into your office, but for a long time, prisoners were held back there. Some of them died back there too. Drunks aspirating their own vomit, internal injuries that went unreported until someone passed out or began bleeding from an orifice or another, and, quite probably, some cowboy cop who went off on some frequent flyer once too many times upside the head. Anyway, there were deaths in the building. Right after the cells were removed, people alone in the front of the building would hear those quiet, shuffling footsteps coming up the hallway, stopping at the water cooler, and when the person looked down the hallway, there was nothing there. My trainer told me that he had heard them some dozen times, always on midnight shifts, always when he was alone up here, and always exactly the same. And you've heard them before?
It wasn't a question.
I have. How many times I told myself it's the pipes or the wind or the bloody permafrost creeping up the floors, I don't know, but I heard it.
She visibly relaxed.
Thank you. Covering for you the other night, I heard them. You were out front and C was on the street and those footsteps came right up to the cooler. I thought I was losing my mind. C's been here longer than either of us. Let's ask him. No. This isn't the kind of thing you ask about. Not another cop, especially one that might feel obligated to write it up on his daily report or something.
I understood this. Many nights I had seen and heard cops going on about the daily report and what would be in it, what would or should be left out, and this was the kind of thing a cop like C would feel obligated to report. He was one of those by-the-book kinds.
But he did see it earlier, when you both came up. He stopped and watched the monitor while you went out. I asked him back in the squad room, and he said he didn't get a good look at anything before I blocked the camera.
We both knew that would be his official position, and that we were wasting our time trying to get confirmation from him. She stayed around dispatch for a while, bringing her paperwork up to work at the spare desk, which had the best view of the security monitor. I busied myself with crossword puzzles, glancing up from time to time. The door locked normal each time I raised my eyes. Suddenly, Sergeant A threw down her papers and snorted,
I can't stand this. Drunks with guns I can handle. Ghosts in the window? I can't handle this.
She had just finished this sentence when the footsteps came up the hallway again. We shot to the office door and watched an empty hallway remain empty.
And that's shit. Fuck this.
She unhooked the pepper canister from her belt, aimed it down the hallway and let loose a burst. I winced and drew back. Pepper spray was a constant around here, as officers frequently tested their cans, came back to the station reeking of blowback spray, or just messed around with it, spraying each other's coffee cups or dinners. The stinging and burning odour drifted into the office, and I waved papers at it as my eyes filled and watered. I stumbled over to the windows and threw them wide open, letting in lots of 45-degree wind and snow. But it cleared the pepper spray, and I stood there a moment, breathing real air. Suddenly, I caught sight of a cop car the sergeant had left out front. There were handprints on the rear window, just where they would have been if an officer had positioned someone there to pat them down. I showed them to Sergeant A, who just stared, and then called for Officer C, who came up. He stared at the handprints for a moment, then turned away from the window with a shrug.
Someone looking to see you if you're in the car?
He muttered.
Someone? Out there? On a night like this?
She asked, frustration and disbelief in her voice. I dug out the spare camera that was kept charging in the dispatch office and handed it to her.
Pics?
I suggested. She nodded and headed out to the car. I saw the flash reflecting from the snowflakes as she shot frame after frame. Officer C watched her the whole time, not saying a word. I turned to him and asked,
When you saw that guy at the door in the monitor, was he wearing gloves? Could he have even left those handprints?
Officer C shook his head.
Didn't see anyone out there.
Then, in an almost inaudible voice, he added,
I never see anyone out there.
He turned and left dispatch. Sergeant A came through with the camera, indicated that she was going to process the pics, and went down the hallway. More time passed without incident. Then, Sergeant A brought me the camera and showed me 2 pictures of the handprints. At least they were real enough to show up on the film, unlike everything else that was happening. I was just about to say this when the 911 screen lit up with its usual blaring siren, and I was taking the report of a fire downtown. Normal routine kicked in, normal for emergency services anyway, and I soon had cops on the way, the firefighters out of bed and into their rigs, and answered the other 22 callers that all thought that they were the only one to see the fire. Prints, footsteps and visitors were completely forgotten about, until I got to work the following night and found a note from the chief. He asked me to hang around and see him after my shift ended the following morning. Nothing out of the ordinary, this happened every so often. But when I went into his office, I saw the handprint photos on the desk right away. He asked me directly what I had seen and heard 2 nights before. I told him and added the other occurrences and the stories that B had told me. The chief sighed and leaned back into his chair.
I figured it was that again. Every so often, these things happen around here. Everyone is driven around, trying to make the headlights show on the monitor. People have set tripwires in the hallway. This was the first time anyone pepper sprayed that ghost, though.
His voice trailed off.
Let's hope it's the last then, hey?
I tried a small bit of humour. Bad idea.
It would not be a good idea for the citizens to know that their police station has undocumented residents,
he sharply said. I nodded quickly. Working for the police was uncomfortable enough way out there, where cops were frequently seen as the enemy. I didn't need my boss on my back.
They'll never hear it from me,
I said, and meant it. That is, until I sat down to type this report. That was over 10 years ago and 4,000 miles away. Late night musings frequently take me back there, and it leaves me wondering just how many times that station has been visited by hooded figures that leave handprints and walk with shuffled feet. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and police remind me to never join the force. I know, they're getting worse, I'm sorry. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. Also remember to tell me in your email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So as promised guys, the creepypasta from the last video was in fact the Deep Web story, which many of you guys actually guessed correctly in the straw poll I put in the comments and in the description. In fact, the poll stated almost 80% of you guys guessed correctly, so well done, and I guess I'm going to have to lift my game a little bit. As always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one. There are so many great creepypastas out there that I would just love to share with you all, and I receive a lot of stories from so many creative writers in my email as well that I thought it would be a real shame not to share some of them with you. But I also understand that creepypastas are somewhat saturated on YouTube, and while many of you have already encouraged me to read some creepypastas anyway, most of you prefer the true stories, which is what my channel is really known for. So I've been thinking about a way to introduce creepypastas on the channel in a way that is fresh and also maintains the things that all of you guys have come to love about the channel. And after some thinking, I came up with the Guess Who theme idea. Now, a lot of you guys seem to really enjoy the process of investigating the stories that I share here on the channel. So in this video, one of the stories is a creepypasta and it's not true. And it's up to you guys to try and discover which story is the creepypasta. And I'll be sure to announce which story is the creepypasta at the end of the next video. I thought that this would be a kind of new and fun way to incorporate some of the fantastic creepypasta stories I receive and to interact more with you guys. And because so many of you guys seem to really enjoy investigating the stories, I thought many of you may enjoy this theme. So, be sure to let me know what you all think, and if I get enough likes and support, I'll be sure to make more of these. But without further ado guys, I hope you all enjoy the video, and let's begin.
Number 3.
Okay, so I know compared to ghost stories and scary skeleton stories, my story isn't as frightening. What really sticks this to my memory though is its completely unexplained nature. A few years back, I worked in a local supermarket of a chain I won't mention, aside that the uniforms are black. That comes in later. Anyway, I was about 16 or 17, small and generally unexperienced. I just needed extra money while I was in college so I could get the train to see my girlfriend. Call me a modern day romantic, I know. Anyway, I hated the work and often took longer breaks than I should upstairs in the employees' room. The store is a large square shop floor with a door at the back leading to a single walkway. At the end of the walkway is a set of stairs leading up to the warehouse room after the shop floor, and the break room adjoining that. There's no other way down aside the stairs. So, I was on break eating some out-of-date stock, and over at the intercom I was called to the tills. I can't remember what day it was, but there were very few of us workers on that night, so it seemed pretty busy to us. There was me, an older woman who I think was called Becca, my friend Sean, and my manager, whose name I've honestly forgotten. I responded to the call, dragged myself up and out of the door to cross the warehouse and down to the shop floor. The warehouse is full of crates and those large trolley cages we use for moving stock into a shop floor. As I came out the break room, I saw a person duck behind one of the said cages. I thought it was Sean, as the shape was black. Remember, the uniforms, right? The shadow was large and 100% human. Arms, legs, a head, the whole lot. I called out hi, as Sean is a bit of a lad and would probably get offended if I strolled past without greeting him. But to my surprise, I got no response. I walked up to the cage and peering around it, there was no one there. I'd like to say as well that I'd never taken any kinds of drugs or hallucinogenics, and at the time drank rarely and sparsely, so I couldn't have been affected by anything like that. The lights in the room were bright and modern, so there was no flickering and no way it could have created a shape like that. Plus, they were directly overhead, so it couldn't have been my own shadow. And with that, I was 100% done with being in that room. I legged it down the stairs and got to the bottom, noting that the slow creaky door was shut tight. If anyone had somehow got down there super fast, it would have taken an age to shut it. I got out onto the shop floor and went to find my manager. I was still trying to be rational and decided that if there was an intruder in the warehouse who had just hidden very well, that didn't look very good on me for just walking past. I located the manager and asked where everyone was. He seemed confused, but told me that Becca was on tills and that he had been in the office and Sean was loading fruit by the front door. Weirdly, I was the only person in the entire back of the shop. So, all of this doesn't sound overly scary, but what keeps me from dismissing it as just a trick of my mind is how all the facts are stacked against it. I like horror and creepy things as much as the next guy, but I sleep just fine at night knowing it's all just imaginary. My story though, it's very true. I saw something. Not a shadowy haze, but a human mass which was there when all logic proves it can't have been. And that scares me to the very core. In fact, I'll never forget it.
Number 2.
I lived on an American air base in Utah with my husband. If you don't know much about what it's like living on a military base, then let me tell you, it can sometimes feel like a 1950s dreamland. People leave doors unlocked, and at dusk everyone comes out of their homes, sits on their porches and just chats. There are even base picnics. Even though my husband and I met as we were both enlisted, I had left the military and discovered how the wives are often treated like they should be there to serve the family, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. But all in all, the community was very welcoming and very predictable. As a part of my duty to my husband, I looked up a volunteer position helping military families, and it was through them that I met a large group of amazing friends. Every week we'd have a meeting, which ended with us getting completely drunk and stumbling home at 2 or 3 in the morning. It was great because we all lived close enough that we didn't need a DD and all the kids would be nearby if they needed anything. After a long week of going to college classes, it was a great way to unwind and cut loose. That winter night was where the mirage faded and the hard reality of the outside world hit me. Before you hear the story and lecture me, understand that this is something I had done thousands of times over many years, as did most of my friends and many strangers. I was walking home, as usual, on a Saturday night, drunk, dialing my husband with half an empty bottle of wine and liquor in my sack. Across the street, under the streetlight, I noticed a military guy also stumbling home in the opposite direction. I nodded to him and thought nothing of it. He was a soldier, just like all of the family guys on that street were. I didn't have any chills and no alarm bells went off. The streets were all well lit, even though it was late. After all, this was a military base. All I remember about him was that he was a white guy wearing a hoodie and that he was a big athletic dude, which is not all that uncommon. I looked directly at him and the shadows covered his features, so I couldn't say anything more. I assumed that this would be the end of it and turned the corner to walk up the hill to my house. My husband had been playing video games, and while I was chatting to him about coming home, I heard footsteps behind me. They were walking in step with mine. Anyone who's learned to march knows the echo of multiple feet hitting the ground at the same time. They were quiet at first, but another nifty trick of being a veteran is vigilance. I may be female, and I may have gotten soft around the middle, but you don't stop noticing all of the minor details. These footsteps though, they were farther behind me, so there was no need to panic yet. These streets were commonly travelled by people at night, and it could be anyone walking home. Another thing you learn is that walking in step comes naturally. If you've been in the military, you probably correct your step without noticing just because it feels unnatural not to. I turned around to see who it was, and there, at the corner, was the hooded man. He had turned around and was now walking in a step a block behind me. Trying to stay calm, my mind raced to come up with an explanation for this. Still not wanting to see the danger, I thought, he must have forgotten something at his buddy's house and is going back to get it, or something. At the same time, I tried to keep my husband on the phone because this was starting to scare me. In the back of my mind, I tried to think what kind of weapon I had, and the only thing I could come up with was the heavy wine bottles or the cloth sack I carried them in. Blissfully unaware, my husband gave me some reason he had to get off the phone. He'd probably come to some difficult part of the game which required concentration. I couldn't think of a reason to keep him on without overreacting, so I stupidly let him go. I wish I had thought to pretend to keep talking, but I didn't. As soon as the phone came away from my ear, the steps, they quickened. I turned around, and the man had begun sprinting toward me. This was no light jog either. It was as if he was racing to hit me at full force. In that moment, fight or flight mentally kicked in, and I stood there because I knew I couldn't outrun this guy. I was so close to home, but he was too fast. So I grabbed the handle of the sack hard and wrapped it around my wrist to give myself a better grip. I turned back around and began running, but I was preparing to hit him as hard as I could. Meanwhile, with my other hand, I reached back into my pocket and used speed dial to get my husband back on the line. My husband picked up and I yelled at him to come outside at the corner of the street. He said he would get on his shoes and I told him not to. He asked if something was wrong and in a panic I said, "No, just, I need you right now." I still don't know why I said that. Luckily though, he could hear the panic in my voice and came running. The steps were so close behind me now that I felt like he was right on top of me. This whole thing probably only took a few minutes, but it felt like my home was a million miles away. Finally, I could see my husband burst around the corner with his untied shoelaces trailing after him. I waved frantically and ran to him as quick as I could. By the time I turned back around, the man, he'd vanished. Probably into the shadows between the houses or something. Neither of us got a good enough look at him to ever catch the guy. I don't know what he planned on doing, but I do know it was shortly after this happened that a big news story broke out about the military not prosecuting rapists who were on active duty. It wasn't long after that I watched a documentary about this, and I still shudder to think what he would have done if I had lived a little further away or I had tried to fight him. All of us had a DD pick us up after that night. There was always someone to escort us home as well and see that we made it inside safely, and no one ever kept their doors unlocked after that.
Number 1.
I'm not too sure how to write this out. It's been 2 years since the incident occurred, and I'm still visiting a psychiatrist twice a week and under some different antidepressants to keep my school and social life from coming to a dead stop. This is a story about how, unlike most stories I've read about the deep web, I was not openly stalked or tormented by some deranged rapist or murderer that I ended up stumbling upon. Instead, this is a story about how I was purposefully saved by one, but also given a very dangerous warning as a punishment. I won't give you my name, well, my real name anyway. For this, I'll call myself Violet. At the time this happened, I was 18 and getting ready to start college in a different state from my home. Now, I was always a very shy and seclusive girl, so reading and playing video games are my go-to to keep me stimulated. My parents, being strict Catholics, were no help either. So, I was very sheltered and had only a few friends and my pet cat for company. This was the last week of summer before I had to move off from school, and my best friend invited me over for a get-together of movies, games, and surfing the internet. I brought my laptop along, as hers was getting repaired at the shop. As we glanced around funny videos and laughed ourselves silly, my best friend, her name's Mira, decided that it would be an interesting adventure to pursue the deep web or the dark net. Now, I'm a paranoid person, and I'm no stranger to those stories about how the minute you get on the deep web, the predatory creeps that are regulars there are immediately on your tail and destroy your life entirely, even with that protective safeware that's supposed to keep you untrackable. But Mira reassured me that her boyfriend goes on there a lot, and that there can be some interesting things to look at, like private old historical documents and classified UFO information, which she knew that I was interested in. Before I could even get a word in edgewise, she grabbed my laptop from me and began attempting to get the software on and look for the hidden wiki, as she called it. I protested, of course, but I'll admit it. The thought of reading secret government information that they didn't want you to know about is a bit exciting, to say the least. It almost makes me forget about the child porn and the smut films that literally blanketed the majority of it. Almost, anyway. Fortunately, we didn't stumble upon any of the latter. As we pursued through the links, we were actually lucky and didn't run into anything extremely horrifying. We did end up accidentally clicking on a really screwed up cult website, but we managed to backtrack just before we saw anything too terrible. Before I knew it, my mum called and I had to go home, and so I said my goodbyes and told her that I would text her before I got home to let her know I was safe. As I got settled into my comfy room, with my cat pressed against my leg as she slept, I realized that I had left the hidden wiki still up. Out of curiosity, and as we didn't find any historical classified documents through the last search, I decided that I would attempt another go at it. I was a little comfortable now, able to go through and not be too wary about seeing something disgusting or disturbing. A chat box popped up a few seconds after my fourth link click. A message appeared.
Good evening.
I swear that I did, in fact, shit a brick from this. For a moment, I was stunned. All I could think about is every single story I had ever heard on Reddit or Creepypasta. I was going to be raped, family butchered, and then left somewhere in a dark, cold warehouse to die. Fuck, I thought. Another message.
It's alright. I can wait for a reply, or not, if you want. I could imagine this being a little terrifying for you. Take your time.
Well, for my future murderer, they're certainly polite, I thought, now surprised by the well-manners displayed before me. Without understanding why, I began to type.
Who are you?
Yeah, I know, great reply. The person on the other end immediately began to type. Their username was a mixture of numbers, nothing obvious or anything really. Anonymous, that's definitely the word for it. They replied.
Just a lurker who stumbled upon a newcomer. You're lucky I'm not one of those sick fucks on the kiddie porn sites.
I was silent at that, and then I received another message.
I imagine that's not very funny to someone as kind and innocent as you. That's okay. It's better to have more people like you in this twisted world. Much better.
Alright, either I'm hallucinating this entire experience, or I'm about to go headfirst into some Tumblr fangirl's demented creepypasta fanfiction. I prefer hallucinating, to be honest. I shook a little and typed again.
You don't know anything about me, and the fact that you're so polite, I don't get that.
They typed back immediately, and I waited.
Would you rather I look up your IP address and send you creepy threats while hacking your information? It can take a bit, but I can do that too.
No thanks. I'm not insulting you. I'm just surprised, to be honest.
And I can understand, but not all of us are perverted animals on here. Some of us have our pleasures, but we also have etiquette.
I was about to type again when they continued onward.
Now, Violet.
My face paled.
This is a place where you shouldn't be. Not to sound like a chiding parent, but you are a vulnerable young girl. You may as well be a large thick steak hanging from a string right now. You're lucky I found you before others did.
With shuddering hands, I typed back.
Others? What would the others do?
We both know what they would do, Violet.
And I knew that this person was right. The thoughts had flashed in my head only minutes before. The user typed again.
You have a cat?
I blinked. Now, I can see how this person could have guessed or found my name. I'm highly sure they traced my router or IP address or something to that effect. But even on my social media, which I really don't have, just a very private Facebook, I never really brought up that I had a cat. It was only until that very second that I realized that my tabby had just climbed up onto my lap, and if I were on a Skype call, that my webcam would be able to see her perfectly. My blood ran cold.
Well, you can certainly see her, can't you?
I tried to be cool, but I was screaming on the inside.
That I can. She's cute. I have a long-haired one myself. I apologize, but this is my way of showing that hacking, it really isn't as hard as everyone says. I'm not the best, but if somebody like me can easily see how you look and what your life looks like, imagine what others could do. You look like a very smart, very bright girl with a future ahead of you. Don't fuck this chance up. Close out and clean out everything on your laptop. Start fresh and never come back here. It's better for you.
Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?
That took some time to type after I read his wall of a response, but as I shuddered and stroked my cat's fur to relax my heartbeat, I could feel their eyes watching me from the screen. Pity. That's what I felt from them. Just pity. You could probably also call it a white knight syndrome.
I can't help but melt at a genuinely kind and pretty face sometimes, and a cat lover. Cat lovers are hard to come by.
Well, I suppose so. Thank you for the info.
No problem. Now, please do what I said. I'll even help you out a bit.
That put me off. I really began to wonder how much control this person had over my computer. They typed before I could respond.
However, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm going to punish you for treading into a place you really shouldn't be.
That's when I shit a brick again. I tried to type, but nothing appeared.
Relax. Nothing physical against you or your family or your cute cat. Just a little warning to show you how dangerous this place really is. It will see on my words of advice, so to speak. You'll understand.
I tried to type again, and this time it worked.
You won't hurt me?
I won't lay a hand on you,
was the response. What choice did I have? I just shakily looked up at my webcam, red light still bright as ever, and gave a nod. Not sure why I chose that as a response, but it just felt right. Good.
Glad we understand each other. Good night, Violet.
I decided to type once more.
I suppose I should tell you to have a good night too. I'm glad that I didn't run into any monsters on here.
There was a pause, and I got their last reply of the night.
Who says that I'm not one of those worst kind of monsters?
And with that, the chat box, it just disappeared, as did the webpage. I closed everything out and I did as I was told. Afterwards, without another thought, I went to bed. I woke up to my mother shaking me. She looked very concerned.
What? Did I do something wrong?
I managed to groan. My mother only furrowed her brow.
Hun, when was the last time you saw Mira?
I was now awake the moment I heard my best friend's name. Apparently, Mira disappeared last night shortly after I'd left. Her parents thought that she had left with me, but the apparent disarray in her room and parts of the hallway made it clear that there was a struggle and she was dragged out of the house. Part of me knew that the stranger that I spoke to had something to do with this. I just knew. My mother and Mira's parents and even the police asked me questions regarding her disappearance, and I told them I knew nothing. I didn't want to tell them about the deep web. I just couldn't. Not even for my friend. For now, part of me began to fear for my own life, and another part, it already knew that they would not like what they found if I told them where to look for Mira. My fears were confirmed when I received an email with a file attachment. It was sent with an email address that looked like a throwaway account, and the subject being one word: Mira. I won't tell you what I saw in that attachment. If I do, my anxiety will flare into a full breakdown and images will burn back into my brain. All I can tell you is that Mira is very much dead. She, or what's left of her, isn't coming back. In the email body, there was a 4-word question, one that will haunt me until the day I die with survivor's guilt.
Do you understand now?
I don't think I ever will. I'll never understand how somebody could save me from a fate that fell on my friend, a fate that they committed. How could a monster decide to devour one but spare the other? No, I think I do understand. It was because they felt like it. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you're all doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming, guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. Also remember to tell me in the email if you'd like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So guys, just a reminder that the next topic I'm hoping to cover will be police stories and military stories. So for all of you officers of the law and military men and women, Number 3. At the time this took place, I was 15, which was just over a year ago. I did some volunteering at a school for special needs, where my nan works. I should point out, the aim of this school is to make the student independent and to teach them how to live with their disabilities, so that they can go on with life without needing to rely on others to look after them. When I was there, I had a great time. I supported loads of young people struggling with special needs, and heaps of them had a little crush on me, giving me little love letters and innocent things like that. I heard that a boy, exactly the same age as me, had a crush on me. It didn't shock me, as he wasn't the only one, and I was popular amongst the students there. He had no physical disabilities though, only learning and social difficulties. On my last day, this boy approached me and said,
"We have the same birthday."
At first I was like, oh, that's cool, but then it occurred to me, how did he know that? Later that day, I asked my nan if she told him, which she replied with,
No, I've never taught him and I don't even know his birthday anyway.
As I said, it was my last day, so I forgot about it. A few weeks later, my nan rang me and said that a boy named Alex had given me a little card. When I received it and opened it, I could barely read the handwriting, so with the help of a few friends, we worked out what it said. It said something along the lines of,
To Ella, I really like you, and I know we haven't been talking much, but if you want to reply to this message, just add me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and we can talk there. My accounts are gaming accounts, and I have a YouTube gaming channel.
I was curious, and I looked through his accounts, but didn't follow him. They did seem legitimate though. Around a month later, I had an extended school break, so I decided to volunteer at the school again to improve my CV. While I was there, he asked me for my social media accounts, which I politely refused to tell him, but that didn't stop him. The evening of my last day of volunteering, he followed me on Twitter, Instagram, and added me on Facebook. I declined his request on Instagram and Facebook, but my Twitter account wasn't private. I was really pissed off that he found them, but also confused how he shouldn't have known my last name. It's different to my nan's last name, and my Twitter username only had my first name in it since it was music related. I blocked his Twitter account, but he made more and more accounts no matter how many I blocked. He wouldn't stop tweeting me stupid things about how much he was in love with me. Eventually, I just gave up. He was disabled and probably didn't understand why what he was doing wasn't right. But then again, he hadn't been taught how to be independent and learn from what's right and wrong, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. This continued for months. I was in the habit of ignoring all of his tweets to me, but then he tweeted me something that made my heart stop. It was my home address. That's when things got even weirder. Somehow, he managed to hack my account, and he started tweeting things about how Alex and I are relationship goals. So with the help of Twitter, he didn't have access to the account anymore. I took this opportunity to report his account, but nothing was done. I read through the tweets too, and he wrote weird things about how we met up and went on dates and how he wanted to propose to me. I was getting really creeped out by this stage, but I knew that no matter what I did, it would be overlooked because he was disabled. Besides, he hadn't done anything threatening, really. One day, my boyfriend and I came home from school to start revising for GCSEs. Everything was normal for a while, but then he tweeted,
"When your girlfriend cheats on you,"
with a picture of my boyfriend and I holding hands that same day. We flipped our shit and went mad. I was scared because the picture, it was taken outside of my house. I told my mum, who called the police, but they said that they couldn't do anything. My boyfriend left at around 8 o'clock, and his mum was picking him up so he could get home safely. I asked for a text when he got home, so I was sure that he was home safe. He phoned me an hour later though. I asked him,
"What took you so long for you to text me?"
in which he replied very calmly,
"Ella, Alex attacked me and my mum. We're both okay, but I'm in hospital because he knocked me out. Don't worry too much about me, I'm honestly fine. But just tell your parents what happened and stay safe. The police are involved too."
Before I could say anything, he hung up. I did exactly what he said. The police turned up, asked questions, and started investigating. My school was contacted, and I wasn't allowed to be on my own anymore. My mum had to pick me up 10 minutes before the end of the day, just in case he approaches me when it's busy. The next day went by, my boyfriend sent me updates, and he was okay. I wasn't left alone, and I forgot about it for the majority of the school day. Following the instructions the police told me, I was sent home 10 minutes earlier, and I arrived home. I went to my room to revise, but before I did this, I rang my boyfriend to make sure he was okay. He was allowed to go home from the hospital since there wasn't much damage. He just had to take it easy. I felt really guilty for the accident, so I invited him around. While I waited, I did some more revision. Then, about an hour later, I heard my mum answer the door. I left my room, and to my complete horror, he was standing in my hallway. He ran at me and pinned me up against the wall. He was surprisingly strong, and then he whispered,
"We can run away now, or I'll kill everyone you love, until I'm the only one left."
He was then pulled off of me by my boyfriend, who put up a very good fight, and meanwhile, my mum called the police. He eventually was arrested, but didn't go to prison because of his age and disability. I was then informed about what he thought. He thought we were in love, and the reason why we weren't together is because my nan wouldn't allow the relationship. He kept notebooks about me, writing about our dates and how we were going to run away together. He had a detailed plan about how he would kidnap me and then we could live together. He actually rented out a motel using his mum's credit card too. The police didn't go into too much detail, but did mention that he was obsessed and everything he did, I was somehow impacted by it. I've been to therapy because of this, but I'm okay. I've never gone into depth about this story, and I'm so happy I have now. It feels like a massive weight has been lifted off of me, but it's taught me a valuable lesson, to always block and report creeps on social media, no matter how many accounts they create. Number 2. It all started earlier in the year. It was the beginning of the year, and I was pretty excited to start the new year off as a fresh new person. As a lot of other teenagers do, I struggled with many problems such as depression and questioning my sexuality. It was just recently that I accepted myself as gay and thought that now accepting myself for who I was, I would finally be able to be happy and free. I had heard of this app called Grindr that gay and bisexual men used for hookups and for long-term relationships. It connected you to local people who lived within a 50-mile radius from you. I had heard many things about this app, such as how it was filled with horny and thirsty men who were looking for anyone to bang. I decided that I should probably stay away from it, but unfortunately, curiosity got the best of me. I created an account that I filled with general information, as well that I was new to the app, hoping people wouldn't be so rude to me. I had to falsify my age, however, since I was 16 and this was an 18+ app. After entering the last bit of information and uploading a picture of me, I was finally able to log on and see the many guys that were on the app, all searching for similar things.